Hey everyone, and welcome back to the How to Play Guardian series. Uh, I'm the Real Ebeb, and this is going to be part 4. We've discussed the 3 major mechanics of Guardian in the first 3 episodes, and now this is going to just hopefully tie everything together. I'm probably going to miss something that's important to my thought process whenever I personally play Guardian, but I think I've got a lot of stuff here that will hopefully empower you to take on the game as this character. Let's see. How do we want to start this? I do have it kind of laid out in the order I want to talk about, but is there anything else I wanted to say first? Oh yeah, there was. This is. I understand that this is from my perspective personally. Um, I might. I might be giving advice that's not completely correct if we ever find out better strategies for this character. This is just how I go about playing them, but I am hoping that the way I present it is in a non-biased manner and can be generalized to anyone's playstyle for the most part. Alright, without further ado, let's get into it. So, like I said, this is going to try and tie together all the rest of Guardian. So, let's just start with what you're going to start with at the beginning of a run. Very first thing that you're going to have to deal with is the heart bonus or the Niao bonus, depending on which way you're going. Probably the heart. And I guess this kind of ties into a later point, but I'll talk about that later in a bit. I'll talk about that more in depth in a bit down here about Act 1. But generally what you need to know is that Guardian is not a very strong character in Act 1. So the kind of heart or Niao bonus that you're probably going to be looking to hit is something that will help you in Act 1. However, you do still want to get as much power later as you can. Sometimes it's a matter of choosing a bonus that does exactly that. Sometimes going for something completely Act 1 oriented is the right play. For example, some Niao bonuses are very well equipped to take on a very aggressive elite path. Under some circumstances, I have taken 3 potion start. And this is on Ascension 20 where you only have 2 potion slots. Take the 2 best potions and move on. Use those plus whatever other potions you roll in the first hallway fights to prepare yourself for the elites up ahead. And then just snowball off that. You get your cards to beat the elites, and then you get relics off of them, and then hopefully that gets you strong enough, at least by the start of Act 2, to keep being strong and maybe taking on more elites, or perhaps being greedy in a sense with your deck. Like, instead of taking stuff just to survive, you'd be taking stuff for later. Slay the Spire is very much a balancing act between how much you need to take immediately to survive and how much you can take for the future. And parts in between, really, because at the end of the game, you're going to be trying to beat Niao or the Heart. So you're always going to be trying to pick up stuff for that when you can. But sometimes you're going to have to pick up stuff for a few floors from now, which is kind of immediate, but also kind of future. There's always risk-reward that you have to balance between that. So, like I said, you don't really have a lot of room in Act 1 to take on some kind of future value. You have to focus mostly on survival, but you do have some wiggle room. Let's see, Niao heart bonuses. Let's see. There's a group of 3 that remove, transform, and upgrade. Removing, transforming, and upgrade are all like your basic card manipulation or your deck manipulation. Remove, I would say, is very good. Guardian very much likes having a smaller deck. And it can give you immediate value if you remove a strike. It makes you more consistent with your defense and your curl up if you still have the well, I guess if you're taking the remove a card, you still have your starter relic. So basically, that means that you'll have a higher defense density in your first couple fights, and that's really important to not leak HP to the first few hallway fights, especially if you're going to go for elites. Upgrading a card can be good, although if you're playing in downfall mode, which you probably are, you're going to be getting a floor 1 campfire anyway, so that's maybe just a skip. Transform is very much later power, at least how I think about it. The way I think about randomness like that is, if I'm going to take this, I need to be willing to accept the risk of what happens. And accepting the risk doesn't mean, yeah, sometimes I'm going to lose. Accepting the risk means I'm taking this because I know that even if I lose this, I still have good chances to win later. And you can't just not take risks in the game. If you never take risks in Slay the Spire, you are going to not be as powerful as you need to be. Taking risks is a longer-term thing. The more risks you take, as long as they're reasonable, the more chance you have of succeeding on some of those risks. Obviously, you need to prioritize your immediate survival, because if you take one risk and it kills you, then the rest of the risks never come. So you want to be playing very calculated risks. So that means being able to survive a lost risk. And if you transform a card as Guardian, you could, the way their card pool is, you have some very, you have cards that rely on a lot of other factors to be in the deck. For example, Guardian Whirl requires you to have 20 block when you play it, or else it's completely unplayable. If you were to transform into that, you would have a lot of trouble, because even though you have defensive mode and Guardian is capable of making a lot of block, they're not very capable of doing that on demand if you're already losing a card from your hand, which would be the Guardian Whirl. And also, you want to be using your block in a way that's handling enemies, rather than just empowering a single attack of yours. At least Guardian Whirl. Body Crash is another thing, because that directly scales with how much defense you get. It's a bit different there, especially with AoE fights. We'll talk a bit more about Guardian Whirl later. I have a group of cards that I'm going to talk about after we get these points down. But there's also Prismatic Barrier and Prismatic Spray, which require you to find and socket gems into them before they become good. And you have a dead card until then, and you have to take on the risk of taking gems in your deck that are unsocketed until you find a campfire. There's plenty more of Guardian's cards that require some level of support in order to be good. There's not very many cards that you can that are in the pool that are just fine. Well, not very many. Maybe there's more than it sounds, but at least for me, the risk that Transform brings is too high. I can't really live with a risk like that on floor 1 when I have absolutely nothing else in my deck, because then I have to spend so many floors trying to build around it. I have nothing else to fall back on in the meantime in order to keep me safe. So it would require too much. For me, transforming a card and getting a bad result would require too much effort to come back from. And a big reason for that is because of Guardian's weaker Act 1. If you set yourself behind, you're going to lose a lot of HP, even in the easy pool hallways. Although Jawworm's already kind of like that, but how do I put this? If you fall behind too early, you're going to be spending a lot of the rest of the act trying to catch back up. You need card rewards in order to or just cards in general, in order to get stronger, in order to get those cards, you need to go to fights. You could go to shops, but you need to go to fights to get gold anyway. So you need to be taking fights. Even if you fall behind, you have to keep taking fights, which means that you would have to go to campfires and then heal. And then those campfires are not being used for upgrades, which would make you stronger as well. So you're in this kind of loop of constantly being behind and not having enough opportunities to catch back up. So this kind of risk could completely cripple you. And in a way, it could take away your ability to take future risks, which are important to taking risks in the first place. The risk balancing act I was talking about before. The more risks you take, the more likely some of them are to pay off. So I guess if you set yourself behind too much, you're not going to be able to take those risks in the first place because they're likely to kill you. I guess in some cases you'll be forced to if you're desperate. You're very, very close to death, but you know, you can't, if you're that close to death, then you die, and you might die, and then if you die, you lose. And we're trying not to lose here. It's a lot of explanation for transform a card, but that's kind of my my viewpoint on transforming as Guardian. Not every character has this trait. I think there are some characters that have a lot of very good cards, or even the bad cards don't require that much support. Silent is another one that's kind of, you need some support for the cards. Ironclad, I would say, is fine. Defect, Defect's kind of in the middle. Kind of a combination of both, I would say, actually. Where sometimes the cards, a lot of cards need some kind of support, but they don't take very much support. And that's something that Silent and Guardian can't really say, in my experience. So I would say that, you know, Ironclad and Defect are pretty good to transform on. I haven't played a lot of the other characters in Downfall in a while. But Collector just came out. And from what I can tell, they have some good transform targets too. They're very strong in general, which kind of lends themselves to being good at transform targets, but I haven't really found a card that requires there's not a lot of cards that require so much support around them. There's maybe a couple. Finger of Death is one that requires you to have 4 reserves in order to be able to play. And reserves are a special kind of energy that you get from playing certain cards. So you would have to find a certain card. You would have to find certain cards that give you reserve, and then not use it on other cards, and then in order to be able to use that. And then draw order comes into play. Like if you draw Finger of Death first, then you're not going to be able to play it. It would require a lot of support. But most cards are in their pool are not like that. They're very good front load or some kind of debuffing that benefits you a lot. And their synergies are very, very easy to put together. Yeah, I don't know who else we can say that about in Downfall. If you have a favorite character from Downfall, you probably know which category they fall into. If you think about it. Moving on, choose a card to obtain is a pretty good start. Choose a card, giving you random cards, either commons or uncommons. You can't get a random rare from that early, based on how the rare chance works. Choose a card basically means that it's one less hallway fight you have to get in order to get a card, which means you're already ahead by 1 fight, which is good for several reasons. One, whatever your first hallway fight is left less up to chance. That's great for stuff like Jawworm, or the small spike slime, medium acid slime combination, which honestly almost hits as much as Jawworm does. Sometimes Cultist. Cultist, if you get a bad draw order against Cultist, you're probably going to be taking damage as Guardian, because again, they are slow. So you want to be dealing as much damage to them as you can. It's very similar to Silent in that way. You don't have bonus damage attached to your character at the start of the run. Again, we'll get back into that in a minute. So yeah, if you choose a card, you're better off for all 3 of your early hallway fights rather than just 2 after the first one. You have an extra card for a hard pull fight. you have an extra card for an elite, and even though we're going to talk about the 15 card rule at some point, having one or two more than 15 is still good. And honestly, the more cards you have that are not strikes and defends in your deck, the better. So yeah, choose a card is another great early game start. Honestly, I think even if you don't take from that, even if you hit 3 duds, you're, I guess, pushing your card RNG 3 cards forward in a way. Like, you're seeing more. You're also getting your rare chance up. So yeah, the earlier that you can get a snowballing advantage, the better. Taking less damage means more HP. More HP means more upgrades. And all of that means more fights and more risks that you can take. And the more risks you take, the more often you are to win. As long as you are. But the more risks you take, the more often you are to win those risks. At least if you're taking reasonable ones. Let's see. Choose an uncommon colorless card. That one is a little bit more random. I would say it's better than Transform. I've taken it a couple times. But there are still a decent number of duds in the colorless pool. I would say, though, that you can probably take something from it most of the time, and then it doesn't take that much to build around. Guardian's card pool is very much relies on specific things from Guardian's synergy set in order to work. That's kind of just how the design goes. For each character, they all have their set of themes and synergies that work together, and then if you're a dev, you're basically choosing how much you need those synergies in order to actually work. Guardian's level of synergy that you need between cards is usually pretty high. It's possible, and it doesn't feel bad to play with, in my opinion. It just makes random stuff more risky. But with colorless cards are designed to be like generally good stuff, or generally useful. So building around something that's a little bit less obvious, a little bit less front-loaded, or a little bit less obvious to use, isn't so bad. Isn't so hard. So maybe you are a little bit. Maybe you're a little bit worse in the first few floors, but after you take a couple cards, you're much better. You might have to be a little bit more conservative in how you take the elites, or even the hard pulls, but so long as you're careful, I think that's still okay. Although I think it is a lower tier. Obtain a random rare is very similar to Transform, I would say. I think there are a lot of good hits in the rares, but since the pool is so small, you can still very easily hit something that needs so much, that either needs so much building around them, like Ancient Construct, or something that is just bad. There are bad rares. Time Sifter is one of them. You would have to have so much stasis in order for that to be useful. And honestly, with the amount of setup that Time Sifter needs in the first place, it's just a dead card for a while. So random rare, like, it really depends on your playstyle, I guess. Like I said, this whole thing is about how I approach this, and I guess part of that is a consistent win rate, trying to play every run as if it's winnable, and looking for as many opportunities as you can to succeed. Some people really like playing the gambling game, though. If you really like going for random rare, I'm not going to stop you. I don't think you should stop either if you really enjoy it. Games are designed to have fun in the first place. This is just how I have fun, though. And being consistent and working towards being better at the game. And I guess that's kind of just the restriction I set for myself, playing every run as if it's winnable. So obtain a random rare card. Wow. Just like Transform a card. It can work out if you hit something good. That you always have a chance to hit something good. I just don't think that I don't think that the low rolls there are worth the risk. Because hitting those low rolls will cripple you too much to come back from. Won't be able to keep taking those risks. I guess I can appeal to the gamblers there. You're always going to be taking risks in the game, right? So, like, even if you do like going for random rare cards, maybe consider going for lesser risks and seeing how many of those you go for. Maybe that's not worth actually saying. Gamblers like high rolling. This is really up to you, though. I don't know you. You know yourself a lot better than me. You get to decide. I can't intuit any particular personality from my audience. Anyway, moving on. Common Relic. Random Common Relic is like the staple of Slay the Spire starter rewards. Like, everyone loves seeing this. I love seeing it. The thing is, though, is that the more I've looked at it, the more I've seen that some of the common relics do actually force you to wait to get any kind of value from them. Like, I think you can get value from most. So I think that, like the transform and the random rare, you can build around them if you're given time. And common relic is kind of like that. I think it's still good enough to take. I don't think that the low rolls hurt you. They just don't do anything. So not having anything is kind of okay, so long as you have a conservative enough path. I think most of them will give you value by the end of Act 1. So that's still pretty short term in terms of the entire game. And since you have an entire Act 1 map, you can sort of plan around what you get. If you get something like a Vajra, that's great. Vajra will help empower you. Vajra will empower you to take all kinds of fights. Elites especially, it's great to have. But something like Ceramic Fish is going to take time. Especially Ceramic Fish, because you need to take cards and you need to find a shop to cash in. So while that's not, while you can, I was gonna say, Ceramic Fish is not very much liked, but I will say that if you get it as your first relic, you can make it work before, you know, it's too late, I think. You can get Act 1 value out of it because it's not too hard to find a path with a shop before the end of Act 1 that still hits enough fights or elites or campfires in order to be worth it. Sometimes you get unlucky, sometimes you get an early shop, and I guess you get, like, what, 18 more gold before that shop sometimes? Which can be significant. Maybe it can get you a common relic by then, or a shop relic. Shop relics are always around the common relic value. If you take like 3 fights, maybe you get like 27 gold plus 45. That's 63. 163 is within the range. So yeah, you could maybe get a shop relic if you get 3 fights beforehand, maybe 4. But anyway, no matter what your common relic is, I think you can get value out of it before the end of Act 1, or very close after. Like I said, Ceramic Fish, if you get shop in the early parts of Act 1 and can't really use the extra gold from Ceramic Fish, you can probably find an early shop at the beginning of Act 2 instead. So you won't suffer for too long. The worst thing that happens is that you have nothing for a while. And like I said, you do kind of need something for the early game. So if you're going to take Common Relic, have a backup plan to do something a little bit more conservative. Maybe don't go for the 3 elite path with 1 campfire. Go for maybe the 2 elite path with 2 campfires, with the campfire on floor 6 instead of the elite. That kind of thing. 100 gold is dependent on the map. 100 gold does nothing until you hit a shop. It's very similar to what I was just talking about with random common relics, depending on what you get. If you have an early shop in the act, that's great. You should probably go for that to start getting your advantage earlier in the run. It's also, I guess that's as much as I can say about that. You can probably afford a shop relic of some kind or a common relic. Or maybe you can take a card of some kind. Cards and shops are kind of hard to find as Guardian, though, I'm finding. Like I said, a lot of random cards from Guardian are very setup reliant, so it's actually pretty possible to be unlucky with the 2 attack slots in the shop. Every shop on the top row has 2 attacks, 2 skills, and a power. So the 2 attack slots could still be unlucky and be something that requires too much setup. But usually a relic or a card remove of some kind is fine. Uh, you can buy potions too. It's still pretty consistent before the first elite, so I think 100 gold is still pretty solid. 3 random potions, like I said, is a thing. That's probably one of the most early game things. It's a little bit weird. My last run with 3 random potions didn't work very well in Act 1 because my first couple fights I didn't need to use potions, but they both dropped potions. And then for my next fights I had to use potions, but they didn't drop them, so I didn't have any potions for the elite. I think that was partially due to a misplay, if I remember correctly, but yeah, if you have a really aggressive route, 3 random potions might be the way to go. Although I would try it for yourself and then form an opinion based on how that went. Based on what could have happened as well. Could something have gone wrong? Could the potions have easily backfired on you? And if you feel like it does, then maybe just avoid that. Really the only way 3 random potions is going to be good is if it consistently helps you get through a very aggressive elite route. Elite and fight route, honestly. Like, you take 4 fights, then elite, campfire, elite, elite. If that doesn't help you, then don't take it. It's not worth it. You waste too much later game potential for something that could just be wasted in the first 2 fights. Maybe even 3. Because you can only carry so many, and they drop them pretty frequently. It's going to be around a 50-50 overall on your potions. You'll probably get a potion every 2 to 3 floors. No, every 2 floors on average, so maybe 1 to 3 floors, sometimes 4. But yeah, that's that. And then there's the Max HP and Meow's Lament, or I guess Heart's Malice in Downfall mode. Max HP is not great, but it is good in Act 1 for an extra bit of HP for a slightly more aggressive elite route. If you're really desperate for something, like if your options are not great, max HP can be a way to be a little bit more aggressive with elites because you won't have to, because you'll have more HP to spend on them, right? As far as Meow's Lament / the Heart's Malice goes, though, that's going to be a lot more worth to take as an early game thing than both max HP and potions. That will guarantee that your first few combats are free. That you will not take any damage from them, which is great for consistency's sake, because you have both Jawworm and small Spike Slime, medium Acid Slime to worry about. Those both do a lot of chip damage to Guardian, which can limit your ability to take elites, or sometimes, in really bad cases, more hallway fights. And even Cultist with a bad draw order, like I said before. Lice are usually okay. You probably only lose like 4 HP at worst against them. Maybe 5. But yeah, just making sure you have that consistency is great. Also, unlike 3 random potions, you're getting potions on top of that most of the time. You're either getting more potions or your potion chances are really high. Also in Downfall mode, I like to path to early shops to get a free card reward that's boosted by rare chance. I think that's getting patched. Last I played, though, it was back. It might have already been patched, but you're still getting elite card rewards. By the time you're watching this later, you might be watching this immediately, but it might be gone in a week or so. But regardless, you're probably going to get some kind of potion. Actually, I just remembered, I don't remember getting potions with Heart's Malice. Because the enemies run away. They don't drop gold. They give you card rewards, but they don't drop gold. And the past couple times I've done it, I haven't gotten potions from them either. If I had remembered to ask about that, I would have. That might just be something you have to ask about on the Discord or try for yourself. There's also Elite Snipe, I guess, as a possibility. I personally don't really like Elite Snipe unless the path after the Elite kind of sucks for a few floors. Like, if you're able to snipe an Elite pretty often with a bunch of question marks, you still need to get more card rewards after that elite. A free relic can be useful sometimes, just like random common relic as a reward. But you're definitely not guaranteed. So if you snipe an elite and then you have another elite in 2 floors, you're gonna struggle a lot unless you found some kind of amazing card at that elite fight. You really do still need to get card rewards. So I would very much suggest using it on fights if you want consistency. If you're a high roller, then go for the question marks. Downfall events are better than base game events, so maybe you still get value on your deck out of them. Sometimes, though, you could just get like a bunch of gold, or I guess souls in that case. You get a bunch of souls, maybe another relic, but your deck is still strikes, defends, curl up, twin slam. Anyway, that's all that for the normal things. I guess talking about the third option real quick. You can lose max health, you can take damage, obtain a curse, or lose gold. That's it, just 4. Okay. I'm looking at the wiki here. Losing max health is generally fine because, at least at high ascension, you're missing HP already, so you're not losing any current HP, which means it's basically a longer game thing. I find that max HP is the most important at the end of the game, around at Act 4, because right before the final boss, or if you're going up the Spire, both the Act 3 bosses and Act 4 Elite and the Heart. So yeah, losing max HP for the doubled benefit, I would say, is probably fine. Taking damage puts you very much behind in Act 1. I would not do that unless the act sucked and I had like double remove as the other thing. But we'll talk about that in a bit. Obtain a curse, I think, is completely untakeable unless you have 250 gold as the other side and to shop very early. Curses can very, very much hurt you if you get the wrong ones, like regret and pain. This goes back to the acceptable risk thing that I talked about. If you low roll, will you be able to accept that risk? Will you be able to survive to take more risks later? Or will you just die? And I remember taking early curses a long time in the past, and if you find a pain or a regret, they will do a lot of damage. So I did take a curse early on in this series for a chosen rare, and that's kind of stacking 2 risky things together. At least the curse is. But yeah. Lose all gold is fine, although I think losing max health I think is the best one. Losing all gold is probably second. Take damage and curse are probably untakeable most of the time, but it depends on the scenario. Lose all gold just does end up hurting a bit, because you do want to buy like relics and card removes and stuff. But if you have a good enough doubled reward, it's fine. You got the remove 2, you got transform 2, you got 250 gold. Remove 2 is amazing. As Guardian, you remove 1 strike, 1 defend. You still want to keep your defense consistent enough, but you don't want to like lose so many strikes that you can't do damage to elites anymore, or kill cultist for that matter, or jawworm. You still need strikes, so 1 of each is fine. I think that's probably the best option. Removing cards is definitely a late game thing. That it helps late game the most, but it's still very relevant in Act 1 for consistency's sake. So I think it's still a very fine thing on any character, really. I think people very much I think card removes are very underrated as a Niao bonus or as the Empty Cage boss relic. It's not about necessarily how many cards versus you're removing from your deck versus your entire deck. It's whether any turn of yours is going to be inconsistent. And having 1 more strike or defend will always make 1 turn worse. And if that turn is a turn that you're getting hit for a big amount, or a turn that you're not taking advantage of them being downside, them not doing damage, you're going to have problems finishing off the fight. Either because you're behind or because you're dead. So those card removes are still very important. I would say that they actually have the most noticeable effects in Act 1. Even though they're not great for killing elites, they're still going to keep your HP high enough versus hallway fights, and that's pretty significant. Let's see, Transform 2, kind of like Transform 1. You get a little bit more consistency, but I think you hit 2 bad cards pretty frequently, and then you're just screwed. 250 gold is great as long as you have a shop within a reasonable amount of time. Again, you are taking a downside if you take 250 gold, so you need to have a shop in time. If you're fighting like 1 or even 2 elites before you hit a shop, you need to be able to make sure that you're going to survive. So I think that would be a combination of pathing and the max HP loss specifically. You might be able to take damage or the curse if the shop is before, but not after. So a lot of things have to really come into... So if you don't have an early shop to cash in that 250 gold, you really need to have a lot of factors go right for that. Choose a rare card. Even though you get 3 options, I think sometimes you're still forced into some bad options. I don't think it happens very often, but with such a small pool of cards, I think it happens often enough that it's too risky for me. I don't think I'm going to take that again. Choose a rare colorless card is a bit different because it's more generically useful. Kind of the same argument of colorless versus transform. I think rare colorless is better than rare card as far as choices go, which is a bit weird to say. But when I think rare colorless card, I think Hand of Greed, I think Apotheosis, I think Master Strategy, I think even Violence sometimes. Although I've had a couple runs where I've been forced to take like Secret Technique, Secret Weapon, and those have not gone so well. So maybe it's not as good as I'm saying here. Maybe choose a rare card is better than what I'm saying. I don't know. Both of them have risk attached. And if you don't hit something good, then you're going to need help. Maybe you could even take the Bomb as the rare colorless card if you don't have good options. Because this is Guardian, you're very defensively oriented. So a non-attack source is not detrimental. That's interesting. Random Rare Relic is another... It's very much like the Common Relic, actually. I think you get more value out of it than a Common Relic, but you still might have to wait, just like the Common Relic, in order to get value out of it. It depends on what you get. So, again, have some kind of path backup to make sure that if you don't get that value, you're not going to throw yourself into danger before that comes into play. Oh, by the way, if you do create a backup pathing plan, make sure that backup is not absolute trash. Make sure that backup plan is still strong enough to get you snowballing, to get your power going by the end of Act 1 or by whatever elites you're going to be doing, because you don't want to compensate for a bad roll the entirety of Act 1 and then be forced to be behind starting in Act 2 and beyond, because you might never catch up. And then the last one is max HP. I don't think max HP is worth it. Although I guess if you're going for a super aggressive elite route and you don't have another great thing, maybe you could take it for gold loss. You lose gold for more max HP, you take on 3 or 4 elites Act 1 and then you're fine. It's weird, but if you find a scenario where it works, don't let something that's considered a bad option stop you. You always got to be looking for opportunities no matter what. And then there's Boss Swap. Boss Swap is interesting because it has low rolls like the other things do, but the low rolls, even though they are low rolls, Boss Relics are designed to be powerful at any point, not at any point in the game, but eventually. They kind of have to be designed that way because you're guaranteed to be shown 3 of them after each boss. And, the devs don't want to give you a dead draw there, or something extremely inconsistent that might be interesting if you have the right cards, like Duvu Doll is a rare relic. They want to give you something that you will have a very, very good chance of getting power out of, or guaranteed, in fact, if you're given enough time. So unlike random common or random rare, random boss relic will probably give you power at the very... Actually, I guess it is kind of like common rare relic. You're going to get power by the end of Act 1, except this power is going to be really strong for the rest of the game, especially like the Act 3 bosses and Act 4. So what I do with Boss Relic is, if I have a bad act layout, like something with not very many elites or campfires, I'll boss swap. So that even though my Act 1 isn't great, I will be able to start snowballing off the power that comes from a Boss Relic, which is almost always going to be good enough by the time you get out of Act 1. By that time you're given enough resources to make it work. So yeah, and like I said, and I do it like that because Guardians Act 1 is not great. So if you take something that either takes time to come online or actively hurts you, which box relics can sometimes do, you need to be able to survive the act. So that's why I go for that. Less elites and campfires means less risks to take at the same time, which means that you're in less danger of dying because of your boss relic. So that's when I do that. The starter relic is pretty good, I'd say. It turns your curl up into a block machine, and enables one of your most important mechanics for surviving. Defensive mode is extremely important. Alright, I've taken a lot of time to talk about Heart and Yao bonus. I hope the rest of this doesn't take that long. But thankfully this is just a bunch of options at once. Man, I'm going to have to talk about those cards too. Alright, moving on. First upgraded and starting gem. So, I used to be a proponent of the Twin Slam upgrade and immediately socketing most of the time. My thought process there was that any gems that I find are going to just go into Twin Slam very quickly, and then I'll have a very good upgraded damage card with some extra stuff attached. That's pretty solid. I wouldn't say that that's bad, but I've very much come to appreciate the Curl Up upgrade now, because even though Curl Up gets you into defensive mode with Gear Up now, the card that it puts into Stasis is still very important. So with a random card chosen, if you don't have an upgraded Curl Up, it will choose randomly from your hand, and sometimes it will be the wrong card. And what I mean by that is, the way that you play Guardian is knowing a lot about what your future turns are going to look like, and sometimes putting the wrong card in Stasis means that you don't get any of that Stasis value. You do not get a free card that turn, and free cards are really strong, so you want to have something that's useful. So upgrading Curl Up does that. You get to choose, and it means that you can't hit Gear Up, unless you really want to. Curl Up Gear Up is so important that making sure that you don't accidentally hit the Gear Up means that you're making your starter deck more consistent by not putting yourself in danger of not being able to go into defensive mode when you need it, especially against something like Jawworm or the elites. So making sure that you can put the right card in Stasis means you get value on a future turn and don't put yourself in danger of not having defensive mode. Also, the +2 brace is surprisingly useful. I didn't think it was very useful before, but now the possibility of getting a Brace 8 card, especially like a roll attack, which is common, is very... it's actually pretty prevalent. In fact, I'm even starting to consider putting a starting Sapphire gem into Twin Slam, so that a Curl Up Twin Slam can put me into defensive. I know that Curl Up and Gear Up can put me into defensive, but if I can spend my energy on damage as well to put me in defensive mode, I would like to do that. So instead of playing 2 energy to enter defensive, I pay 3 energy, but I also get 10 damage out of it, as opposed to playing curl up, gear up, and like priming shot for 8 damage. You get more damage by doing the curl up twin slam, and you get a lot more damage by doing curl up roll attack. And if you take roll attack, you are going to be very grateful to have that curl up upgrade, because if you are being attacked, you do not want to give up that 16 damage from roll attack, just to make sure that you don't take their damage. So you get the best of both worlds if you have a roll attack and you upgrade curl up. And sometimes, maybe if you're lucky, you have another way of just entering defensive mode with the remaining 8 brace. Unfortunately, there's a number of cards that brace for 3, which is a really awkward number. You really wish they were bracing for 4. But a couple of those common brace 3 cards upgrade to brace 4. So it's not all bad. And then there's also priming shot, which upgrades to brace 6. So that plus another brace 3 card would get you into defensive mode. Or even just 2 brace, or even just that plus a priming shot plus either another priming shot or an upgraded brace 3 to brace 4 card. So it opens up a little bit of possibilities to get you to enter defensive mode earlier. And also, there's this thing that I've noticed about defensive mode. If you have 20 brace in your deck, excluding gear up, if you're not counting this, if you have 20 brace in your deck, you will be able to enter defensive mode with those cards, and then on the second shuffle, you enter defensive mode with those cards and gear up, because you need 30 brace. You get that 20 brace, and then the next shuffle you get 20 plus 10. It's a very, very convenient setup that it works like that. You start out with just curl up, you enter defensive mode once, and that's good with gear up. You get curl up plus enough brace to enter defensive by just those cards. You can enter defensive mode a second time on the second draw with just cards and not losing HP. That's all great. I think I've realized recently that in my runs, I have not been taking a lot of gems, and I'm starting to think that that's a bit of a mistake. I'm going to be trying to experiment with gems a little bit more in the coming episodes. So maybe upgrading and socketing Twin Slam is not such a bad idea. Maybe you do want as much value out of that as you can. I do think, though, that curl up is right for the time being, and I think that's pretty likely to be correct in my eyes, for the simple reason that Twin Slam is a really, really good card if you get the right gems in it. So if you put random value in it, if you put random gems in it, it's going to be harder to take advantage of that doubled gem value, which is what you really want Twin Slam to be doing. Twin Slam doubling gem value is very strong. You don't want to waste it on random stuff. Like if you socket both a strength and a dex gem in it, you're probably only going to be able to take advantage of one of those buffs. So then you've just wasted a gem slot. Having something that is synergistic, something that is smart about your Twin Slam is probably going to do you a lot more than just socketing randomly. So being picky about that is fine. I think that I'm probably going to be a little bit more speculative about gems, though. Maybe leave them unsocketed for future cards rather than putting them in Twin Slam. So yeah, if you prefer Twin Slam, that's fine. I don't think that the damage upgrade is actually as much as it looks like, because I've found from my runs going up the Spire that actually the only value I'm really getting out of Twin Slam upgrade is 1 damage instead of 2, because I can very often just play strikes instead, or the other attacks that I'm taking in my deck. So Twin Slam often just replaces strikes instead of so an upgraded Twin Slam replaces strikes instead of an unupgraded Twin Slam, and that's not good enough damage. I wonder how well I would have done in the early days of the 100 GA series, 100 Game Analysis series, if I had upgraded Curl Up first. It'd probably still be not great because the starter relic is bad. But I think the control over stasis is fine, and also it would allow me to go into defensive mode with just a Brace 8 card rather than needing 2 cards every time. That probably would have helped a number of times. The starting gem, I think socketing it can be right, no matter what. If you're the kind of person that always sockets, I don't think you're doing something wrong, because it is getting a 0 cost card out of the deck, and in the starter deck that's actually important because you have to deal with Ascender's Bane. So if you draw both the 0 cost and the Ascender's Bane in hand, you're left with 3 1 cost cards, and if you don't have the right ones, you're not getting value out of all of them, and you're possibly taking damage from whatever is attacking you if you don't have defense. Yeah, basically, if they're attacking you and you don't have defense, you're taking a bunch of damage because you drew 2 dead cards, or dead-ish cards. And if they're not attacking you and you did draw defense, then you're not dealing damage. And the less cards that you have that are useful in your hand, the more likely that is to happen. So a gem plus Ascender's Bane is not great. So socketing the gem is good to get rid of that possibility. However, like I was saying, I think it's a great idea to try and get as much value out of your Twin Slam. So the 4 gems are Ruby, Emerald, Tourmaline, and Sapphire. That's 2 temporary Strength, 2 temporary Dexterity, 4 temporary Thorns, and 4 Brace. I think that the way I go about this is, right now I put the Dex gem in, and I put the Thorns gem in. Thorns gem is great for damage. Thorns is not just another temp buff. It does fulfill a very specific function in that it does damage without you having to play cards. That's something that Strength gem can't do, and in a way, not even the Dex gem can do. Except instead of damage, we're talking about block. The Strength and Dex gems both require you to play block cards in order to get value from them, unless you have like very specific stasis cards like Laser Turret or Stasis Field, which give you block just for existing, or damage for just for existing. So Thorns in Twin Slam is probably does the most damage out of all of them. You get attacked, you're doing another 8 damage when you play it, and that's pretty darn good. I guess that would warrant an upgrade. If you prefer to upgrade Twin Slam, that might be a good idea to upgrade. You put the Thorns in there, and then since you want to play the Twin Slam, since it's actually doing more damage, you upgrade it to get that +2. Because you're already prioritizing it over Strikes, so it is actually a +2 upgrade to damage. So yeah. On the other hand, we have the Dexterity gem. I like it because it adds a defensive aspect to your offensive card. You can play both your Twin Slams and then defend, or just 1 Twin Slam and then 2 defense, depending on how much block you need. And you're not sacrificing too much of offense or defense at any given time. You're still getting pretty much what you need for any turn. So I think both of those are very solid gems. I don't really see myself refusing to socket them to look for something better. Tourmaline especially is not great to put in most cards, I don't think, unless you're specifically looking to keep the buff permanently, or have somehow created a strategy where Tourmaline is in a card that you want to save specifically for an attack turn. But like the only common block card that actually has a socket is Piercing Hide. So that's a very low chance. I guess you could put it in Prismatic Barrier, but that's a random uncommon, and I don't often take that to begin with, and maybe you don't either because it's a dead card. So yeah, I would just socket that immediately, no matter what. Dexterity gem, I think putting that in any attack really is fine. So maybe you could keep it out. It's a bit weird to have in a hand with block cards already. Like, sure, you'll stop leaking HP to whatever is attacking you, but you'll also, if you need to do damage to enemies, you're going to be suffering. So, and you're not leaking that much HP anyways. Most of all of the easy pool Act 1 fights attack for 1 more than you can block, or 2 more in the case of Jawworm. I guess Lice also a bit, but they're not really that bad. Actually, let me amend that statement, actually. Cultist, specifically, attacks for 6, 11, 16. Those are all multiples of 5 plus 1, so you'll probably lose like 1 HP when they attack, unless you're using defensive mode. Those turns are probably safe. Jawworm will be attacking for 7, 12, 17. That's 2 more than what you can block for. Lice are probably like 1, 2, or 3. And if they're attacking at the same time, it's probably like 1 or 2. Right? Maybe? No. Lice, you're probably just going to take a few damage anyway. So maybe against them, Dex Gem is not that bad. It's still a little bit weird because you only have 4 block cards in your deck. Curl Up doesn't benefit from dexterity. Entering defensive mode, I mean. There's also the fact that you're going to be adding more attack cards to your deck in the early game than block cards, so Dexterity Gem is progressively going to get worse when unsocketed. So you'll want to have that, I think, just in Twin Slam immediately, so that you don't have to continue leaking HP to having it unsocketed on a bad turn. I'm not sure I'm making the case exactly for that. I think there's probably something I'm missing from that explanation, but I think overall the strength of putting it in there is apparent. Getting to play your offense and defense is good. I'm not sure about the downsides of leaving it unsocketed. Anyway, about the brace and strength gems, I'm going to talk about the brace first. Brace gem, although I was just talking about socketing it in Twin Slam for Curl Up, that may be a better strategy for Downfall mode actually, because you have a first campfire. If you like to upgrade Curl Up, maybe try that. That way you can play your damage cards and your Curl Up to defend, rather than having to waste an energy on Gear Up. Otherwise, though, there are some big downsides to putting Brace into your Twin Slam, simply because Twin Slam is such a powerful effect of doubling gems. Brace is like the one gem that is not good to double that much. Because Brace is only doing something when it only really does something for you in combat when you gain enough Brace to enter defensive mode. So sometimes whenever you play a Brace card, it just doesn't do anything. You're building up to a future defensive mode, which is important. It is important to build up your Brace so that you have better chances at safety on your future turns. But if you're but otherwise it just doesn't do. But it's not going to save you in the moment unless you are already set up. So making your Twin Slam Brace for 8 when you play both of them, doesn't have any synergies with anything else, and it might just not do anything. So it becomes a very mediocre card, and it only fulfills a very, very specific function to enter defensive mode when you have the right amount of Brace away. And like I said, every other gem works really well with Twin Slam, I guess, except Strength, but I'll talk about that in a second. And the rest of them, I think, also have some kind of synergy with another gem of some kind. Meanwhile, Brace just has absolutely none of that. So it just becomes very mediocre. What I am thinking, though, now that I'm talked about it out loud, is very often I end up waiting a long time for a gem to put into Twin Slam, and sometimes I just don't end up upgrading it at all. So maybe I put Sapphire into that and then use that for the defensive mode specifically, because I'm already prioritizing strikes. And then maybe I just remove it later. Maybe I just remove the Twin Slam with Brace later. That feels really bad. So what I do instead is I do leave it unsocketed. And then I wait for another Brace card to show up. And the reason for that is that when you put Sapphire into another Brace card, you up that card's chances of actually being a defensive mode entry. if for example you were to keep it separate from something, let's say you have 2 cards that enter defensive, right? If you, well, 2 cards that when you add up their brace, you enter defensive. Like you have yeah, let's just say you have those 2 cards. You have to draw both of those cards in order to enter defensive. So entering defensive is reliant on when you draw that second card. And since it's always the second card that enters, it's going to on average be later in the deck. I think it's on average going to be in this around the 2/3 point in your deck. So that takes a while and gets worse the more cards you have. Now, if you were to put all of your brace into if you were to somehow put all of that brace into 1 card, you would enter defensive mode with that 1 card. You've instead made it a 50-50 which position you draw it in. So like you have so instead of those 2 cards both having brace, you have 2 cards that has with 1 that has brace and 1 that doesn't. So even though you could draw that single brace card later in the deck, that would be unlucky. You could also draw it early and be able to enter defensive mode then. Basically, spreading out your brace means that you're always waiting for that later card to show up. Meanwhile, condensing your brace means means that card could come at any time, and that is an improvement. So I put that in. So I put that in other brace cards to make it more likely that they enter defensive, and more likely that I'm able to enter defensive on, like, at any point, at any given point. It makes it come earlier in the fight. So stuff like roll attack, I actually give it to that. That's a 12 brace card. That's huge. I put it in priming shot. Priming shot upgraded with a brace gem is really good because it adds up to 10, and I can play that with gear up or curl up and enter defensive mode that way. I can put it in piercing hide. What's another brace card? Is there any other brace 3 card that I can put it in? I don't remember. But yeah, I put it. Those are that is 3 common cards. So you're pretty likely to find at least one of those, and they're all pretty okay. Piercing Hide's probably the worst one for Act 1 because it's not a damage card, but you usually want a couple block cards for Act 2 anyways. And one with a lot of brace is also pretty good. So I usually wait to socket that into something rather than throwing it into Twin Slam. Twin Slam would be a desperation move, although I wouldn't really know because I have to wait for the campfire and going up the Spire. I'd probably have to think about it. It would probably be dependent on the act layout, honestly, once I start doing downfall mode again. Now for the strength gem. I've mentioned this a few times before, but I would like to say it again. You get very marginal benefits from putting into Twin Slam, because Twin Slam can also benefit from the strength. So if you have an unsocketed strength, both Twin Slams are getting benefit from it. Both Twin Slam hits, you get +4 damage. But if you put it into Twin Slam, the first hit doesn't get any damage. Only the second hit does, and it's only 2. So you have to have another card, another attack card that you're using that turn in order to get the benefit from that 4 strength. And let's say it's another 1-cost 1-hit card, like a priming shot. We'll use that again. If you have an unsocketed strength gem with Twin Slam and that, you get +6 damage. If you have it socketed in Twin Slam with the priming shot, you get 0, +2, +4, which is also 6. So in order to actually get more damage out of a socketed strength gem, you need to have either some kind of multi-attack or more energy or stasis of some kind, or specifically the Shiv gem, which is uncommon and is not guaranteed to show up in any kind of timely manner. So, and also, the reason why I think that this is, a couple more reasons why I think this is better unsocketed. That's a reason why it's not great socketed in Twin Slam. Another couple reasons why I think it's better unsocketed is A, because you're taking more attacks as you go. So you're going to have a much better chance of using that an unsocketed gem than, like I was talking about earlier, the unsocketed Dex gem. Unsocketed Dex Gem is not great because you keep taking attacks. Unsocketed Strength Gem is okay because you keep taking attacks. Even though it's not as efficient because it's not in a card yet, it's still pretty consistent when it comes to actually cashing out on that damage. Also, you can stasis it sometimes, but it's sometimes hard to find. It's not consistent to find a stasis card. Like a suspension would be the highest. Suspension would be probably the best thing, although Curl Up Plus could also do it. And the other part is that there are still good other options to put strength gems into. Like any of the zero cost commons, like planning or suspension, those are both great to put strength into, because you're basically just adding another effect to the unsocketed gem that you really want to have. And like I said, you get attacks pretty frequently in your hand, so having that be a zero cost is still pretty consistent with whatever you're going to draw that turn. And because it's free, you're still getting the full benefit out of the rest of your energy. And of course, you're getting the other effect out of it. There's also the rare case of block card, like Piercing Hide. I've sometimes put a Strength Gem into Piercing Hide. That way I can get some safety and then set up my attacks after that. I guess you could also do, like, Prismatic Barrier. Vent Steam is the big one that I like to put Strength Gem into. And that's another common as well. You put Strength Gem into Vent Steam, and suddenly you have a super damage setup card. Not only you're gaining strength and vulnerable, you're doing a lot more damage with even just a single attack, and the vulnerable synergizes with the strength, so you're getting 3 damage out of it instead of just 2. So yeah, I think overall, Strength Gem is better to leave unsocketed. I know some people really like to have a Strength Twin Slam though, and I think that's fine. I can understand. It has a very strong feel to it. Very solid feel as a damage card. I think mathematically it's not correct, but you do what you think is fun. And you're not wrong for doing that. So yeah, those are my suggestions. Dex and Thorns, I think, should go into Twin Slam always. I don't think there's any contest about that. Although I would love to hear your opinion if you disagree. I love hearing I love hearing unconventional opinions about how to do this, because if any of them are actually correct, then that opens up more opportunities to improve and take advantage of. And one of the most rewarding things about playing this game is finding those really obscure lines that end up winning you the run or making you very strong. It's very rewarding for that. So yes, say stuff about that. If you say something if you don't think that Dex or Thorns should be socketed, and in my opinion, don't socket the Strength Gem, and maybe socket the Brace Gem, although I would still lean away from it. Alright, so that's the first upgrade in Starting Gem. Oh yeah, you can also recall. I think that since Guardian's weak enough in Act 1 that you really just want to upgrade and start taking advantage of being a little bit stronger. That's what I think about that. Especially because the keys no longer give you strength during normal fights. I think there was a point in which it may have actually been correct to recall. That may have been correct at one point, because the broken key gave you strength in every fight, but now it's only the boss fight. So recalling I don't think works anymore, because you need to survive the early parts of the game. You might still make a case for having 1 strength in a boss fight, depending on how much you need it to survive. Like maybe Defect. Maybe Defect 1, you need the extra strength, because you do need a lot of scaling for that. But yeah, I would suggest upgrading way more than I would suggest recalling. And I would prefer Curl Up upgrade, although Twin Slam might be correct with Thorns. I think I'd still prefer Curl Up for the reasons I said. Alright, getting past the first floor, finally. I want to talk about Guardian and their slow play style. I talked a little bit about how Guardian is weak in Act 1. I'm going to back that up here. Guardian's starting cards are 4 strikes, 4 defends, curl up, and twin slam. And you start with a gear up to enter defensive with the curl up. What this means is that you barely have any bonus damage. In fact, your bonus damage is either going to be from your Strength or Thorns gem, or it's going to be from defensive mode's Thorns, which only hit once versus most enemies in Act 1. You're going to have a very hard time getting more than 3 damage out of your defensive mode. I think, in fact, it has to be a multi-enemy fight. I don't think a single enemy in Act 1 hits more than 1 time, except for the bosses. Not that I can remember. I guess the closest thing to a single enemy hitting you more than once would be Red Slaver with the vulnerable, but again, that only triggers Thorns once. So yeah, basically you're dealing with a character that has no bonus damage except from the Thorns, and even then that's not that much. Base game characters, you have Ironclad with their vulnerable, you have Defect with their Lightning Orb, and also their Zap and Dual Cast, and Watcher has Wrath. Silent also, very similarly, as we've already made a connection between Silent and Guardian before, they do not have bonus damage in their starter deck of any kind. They have, I guess, a 0-cost card that deals 3. That's kind of like Guardian's defensive mode dealing 3, though. They're very slow players, both of them. What Guardian has that Silent doesn't, though, is an innate mechanic that helps you stall fights. Silent has to put up with having a larger deck and a couple cards that block for a tiny bit more. Weak is not very good in Act 1. It's a little good against some of the stronger enemies like Elites, if you can manage to do it. Specifically Nob and Lagavulin, and Sentries, not so much. But yeah, Weaken is not very good in Act 1. 3 more block on Survivor is not very good in Act 1 either. But Guardian has defensive mode, which gives you 10 block whenever you entered it, and 10 block the next turn, and you get to keep block between turns. Which means that you can use defensive mode to block for 2 hits in a row, or you can stack it all up for 1 larger hit on the next turn. So you have a very large advantage when it comes to that. You can buy yourself 1 or 2 turns of complete safety in order for your slow damage to actually kill things, which is very important. I very much admire how Guardian's defensive mode handles that. I think that actually makes Guardian stronger than Silent in Act 1. I think Silent is absolute trash at Act 1. You really, really have to fight for enough damage to fight Elites. In fact, I have this theory that you shouldn't even be fighting Elites unless you get lucky with your card rewards, but that's not for this episode. Guardian, however, can take Elites, which we'll talk about probably around here. But they can also take hallway fights pretty well. You can still leak HP. In fact, you're probably going to, due to inconsistencies. And because you are slow and some enemies just hit for a bunch, like the specific slime combo or jawworm. But generally you are better at surviving those things without taking a ton of damage. And the main mechanics of Guardian also play into this. You have defensive mode, like I said. Defensive mode keeps you safe during these longer fights. You have stasis, which does nothing unless you have either accelerate or just wait for the cards to come out. It is very powerful once it comes out, though, so defensive mode is very important for keeping safe during that, but overall it is still slow. And gems in a way are slow, although in a more meta-scaling way, because you have to wait for campfires to get them socketed. You have to find them in card rewards and take them over other cards. So overall, very slow. What Guardian really excels at, though, is the safety during that slowness. Is a very slow and methodical approach, which actually matches me a lot. I like very much having control over each turn and treating the game like a puzzle more than a desperate attempt at survival. So having control over my turns and my safety for at least a decent portion of the fights is really appealing to me. Guardian really excels at this, though, by over time making it easier for that setup to actually pay off quickly. Gems go into cards to make them more efficient. It's kind of like how Automaton can stick a bunch of cards together for effects. Guardian sticks gems into cards so that even though you have a ton of setup applied at the same time, it's faster, it's more efficient. You don't have to draw too many cards in order for it to work out. You also gain more brace from your cards over time with the cards that you draft. You can enter defensive mode faster. And Stasis is mostly scaling, but if you take an acceleration card, you can get benefit from Stasis immediately. So overall, Guardian has ways to take advantage of their slow play style. In a way that scales with the game. So even though you are slow, you're never really falling behind. It does feel a little bit bad to be slow sometimes, though. I will say that. But so long as you understand this limitation of Guardian, you can build and work around it. So make sure you have good front load to keep yourself safe. Make sure you're looking to take advantage of stuff even though it's slow. A lot of people prioritize making their decks as fast as possible, which is good because it's powerful, but if you're going to approach Guardian like that, you're going to be passing up on a lot of stuff because it's not as fast as you're used to, and then you're going to lose and think that Guardian's way too slow to win anything. You need to be willing to work with them instead of forcing them into what you're used to. Alright, so moving on past the meta stuff, Act 1. Was I going to say anything else about this? You're weak in Act 1 because you're slow? I don't remember what else I was going to say about this. I think I might have covered it. I also kind of covered it with the Heart and Nial bonus. Like, how often you can take advantage of stuff. I talked about how able you are to how able you are to do bonus damage with your starting deck, which is not very much. I guess I can say that Act 1 is very much about survival, more than it is about trying to take stuff for later. Sometimes you can. After you're past the first elite of the act, I think you're in a much better spot. So surviving the first, 7 floors, maybe 8 floors is top priority, and then you can start taking some extra gems. If you're not already strong enough to take one, you can start taking more other stuff. I was going to say Stasis, but Stasis is actually strong enough to take versus even elites in Act 1. It's a little bit weaker than most attacks, but it's still a step in the right direction because you're getting free cards, so if you can get attacks as your free cards, then you're probably doing pretty well. I guess you also have to think about the boss. Understanding which boss you're going to take on is important. Like Ironclad 1, you absolutely cannot boss swap because you'll cripple yourself too much in order to be able to build against them. They do so much damage and block for so much, and it's on every other turn. They flip-flop between them that you need control over your deck and your stasis in order to be able to do stuff. You got to deal with statuses. It's a lot of stuff all at once that you need to completely drop everything and build to just survive. Meanwhile, Defect, on the other hand, is kind of the opposite, but you also just have to kind of drop everything and survive. I always boss swap against Defect 1 unless I'm like certain that that the map would kill me on a bad roll. Like if I have like a floor 6 elite without a campfire right after, I might be like, I want to boss swap against defect, but I probably can't because that could kill me. Silent one requires you to block a lot more than usual. Defensive mode's great, but if you have just defensive mode and a bunch of attacks to take on elites, you're probably going to struggle. You need to take some cards. You especially need to take some stasis. Anything that can either bring back the antidote, like a recover or a reroute, is good. But also anything, also like a curl up plus or suspension plus on turn 1 can get your antidote on turn 3, which is I think when the Bane attack happens. So yeah, getting rid of poison by then is really important as well. Let's see. Watcher 1. I've never really felt the need to build against Watcher 1. Although I don't remember fighting them too much. I never really saw a pattern. I just noticed what worked and what didn't. I guess having to plan out my turns a lot was a big thing with them, because they go into Wrath on their after they reach 50% HP or lower, the turn after, just like Champ gets empowered. Then they do a lot more damage, and it gets a lot harder to block, to attack them because they have halts, which more than double their effectiveness in Wrath mode. So you really need to plan out your damage, so I guess Stasis is good for that. Also, building against their chip damage with the Mercury Hourglass is important, so yeah, maybe building to be a little bit slower with more defense and Stasis is good. And Hermit, you also kind of just need some defense versus their big attacks. Or, I guess more appropriately, just HP. HP can probably tank Hermit 1. So maybe resting at the last campfire, even if it's a few floors, even though it's going to be a few floors away from the boss, might be a good idea there. So yeah, just make sure you have a plan. I might have been talking about pathing. Yeah, have a plan for the act, including pathing. Have a plan for your boss. The biggest thing I can say about pathing is not to be too aggressive, because you don't want to fall too far behind and have to keep resting over and over at campfires. So like a floor 6 elite might not be a great idea. Maybe sometimes you forego that to take a floor 6 campfire, grab another hallway fight maybe before you start taking elites. Survive Act 1 and take reasonable risks. And don't forget to keep fighting normal enemies so that you don't fall behind on your cards and gold. And even potions to a certain extent. I guess that's what I can say about Act 1. Alright, moving on. 15 card rule is something I bring up a lot. I presented it, like, calling it the 15 card rule kind of presents it as something that someone else said a while ago. Maybe someone else has come up with this thing, but I'm pretty sure that this is something that I realized myself, even if someone else has done it already. If you hit the 15 card rule, is you want to have 15 cards at least for the first elite. And the reason for that is that if you have less than 15 cards, like 14 or 13, especially against Nob and Sentries, and maybe even against Lagavulin to a certain extent, if you have less than 15, you're going to be shuffling without 3 or 4 of those cards. You'll draw your first 10 cards normally, and then you'll have like 4 cards in the draw pile. You'll draw those 4 cards, and then you'll shuffle the rest of your deck. Against Sentries, this is especially punishing because a lot of the deck that just got shuffled is Dazes, and now those 4 cards that you wish you had are no longer going to be replayed. Having 15 cards means that you can shuffle the deck with all of your cards back in the draw pile, so you get the benefit from all of them. Like I said, this is really important against Sentries so that you can have consistency. You have your block more often, you have your attacks more often to kill one of them quicker. Against Nob, this is also important because 15 card rule basically only applies to like a floor 6 or 7 elite. Maybe 8, maybe a floor 8 elite. If you don't have that number of cards by then you're going to be very weak. You're only going to have a few cards that do more than average damage, more than your base deck can do. And if you don't redraw those cards versus Nob, you're going to take another turn of 24, 28 damage. And that's really, really not good. So you want to be able to bring those cards back in order to have another chance to play them, especially with a deck of strikes and defense. Lagavulin can also be a similar thing. Basically, for all three of your elites, you need to have your strong cards, because you cannot beat those elites with your base deck and just a couple cards. You need to have enough that you're doing way more damage than average. Way more damage than you would have done with your base deck. Because again, you have no bonus damage. You don't have vulnerable, you don't have orbs, you don't have, I guess, functions or soul burn or anything like that, or goop. You are just your base stuff, and you are slow. And Act 1 elites do not like you being slow. Even if you can still get an extra turn or two, you need to have good cards that you can draw and play. And this is how you achieve that. Overall, though, this does kind of highlight how weak you are going into a floor 6, 7, or 8 elite. You need to be very careful if you do that, and you need to be very certain of what you're going to do. You need to be reasonably certain of how well you're going to do versus those elites with the deck you have. And I guess going back to this point, you need to have a backup plan for your pathing if you can't do that reasonably. Sometimes when you get right before an elite, you just have to say to yourself, I could very well die doing this. And if you like to play like me and try to win every run, you need to understand that that's going to be a possibility and know when to walk away. It sucks because I really like taking the aggressive routes that pay off. I really like getting the reward of the relic and the extra gold and the stuff, and also fighting elites are cool. It's also what I'm used to, so it's kind of hard to move away from that. But overall, it's better. I find it better to have a run where I'm going to start winning later, even if it means not being, even if it means that I'm a little bit less rewarded right now. Alright, so moving on. Brace in the Act 1 elites. So what I realized is that every single Act 1 elite has a strategy with your brace. Let me take a drink real quick. Alright. So, starting off with Gremlin Nob. Gremlin Nob's attack pattern on Ascension 19 and above, no, Ascension 18 and above, is buffs. So its buff is whenever you play a skill, it gains 3 strength. Then it always does its vulnerable attack for 8 damage. Then it always attacks for 24. That's accounting for the vulnerable. It would be 16 normally. And then 24 again before the vulnerable runs out. And then it cycles back to the vulnerable. So what you want is to be able to enter defensive mode either the turn of being attacked for 8 so that you get the block next turn, or you want to enter by taking damage on the 8 turn so that you have double the block for next turn and maybe even a little bit more for the turn after. The big strategy for Nob is to play your curl up turn 2, or no, your gear up turn 2, because you're not guaranteed your curl up. You play your gear up turn 2 so that you give Nob 3 strength and then they attack for 11. And taking 11 damage plus your 10 brace from gear up puts you in defensive mode. And since you entered defensive mode from taking damage, you get a bonus 10 block for the next turn. So you take 11 damage that turn, but next turn you have 20 block versus their 28 attack. So even though you give Gremlin Nob strength, it overall benefits you to have done that because you're taking only 19 damage. And yes, only 19 is still a lot, but overall versus a Nob, it's very, very beneficial. And you only sacrificed 1 energy to be able to stall that extra turn. You're going to try to kill before that second hit comes in. But even if it does, you are only taking another 18 damage instead of the full 24. So you're still taking less, because that's technically the second proc of defensive mode whenever you leave it. And maybe you have a large block card. Who knows? Maybe you have like a Shield Spikes. Shield Spikes is generally worth playing against Nob, even though it gives them strength. But that's like worst case scenario. You have to take damage in order to enter defensive mode. If with an upgrade Curl Up, if you play it turn 1, that's good. Playing Curl Up turn 2 versus Nob can also be fine. That's another 10 brace. An upgraded Curl Up will give you 12 brace, which means that playing it turn 1 means you can take the 8 damage on turn 2, and then you only take 4 damage turn 3, because it's still 24. You didn't give them any strength. So that's also really good, especially if you have if you can make that happen. If you have like an unsocketed strength gem that gives Gremlin Nob strength, you're still only going back to the 11/28 damage attacks, which is still not very much because of the amount of block you're getting. So yeah, that's the strategy that I find myself using a lot of the time versus Nob. Intentionally giving them strength to enter defensive mode and getting a bonus 10 block versus their next huge attack. And overall, it's pretty effective. But like I said about the 15 card rule and just about your deck in general, you need to have the damage. If you don't have the damage, then no matter how many turns you stall, it's not going to be enough. So yeah. Moving on to Lagavulin, your defensive mode lasts 2 turns. So what you do is you enter defensive mode on the first attack turn, so that you have the 10 block for that turn and the next turn. That's pretty simple. Any other way is kind of wasting block. If you enter on turn 2, or not turn 2, if you enter the turn before they attack, like if you wake them up that turn, or if they wake up naturally, you'll have 20 block for their full attack next turn. But if you didn't have enough damage to play if you didn't have enough attack cards in hand for your energy, then you would just be wasting energy on block that's not going to actually be used, because block carries over, right? You'd get 10 block carrying over to the next turn for 20 total, and if you don't have attack cards in hand that turn, then you're going to be just wasting. You're not going to be using your energy on attacks. Meanwhile, doing it the first turn that they wake up means that you're probably not going to be wasting any energy at all. Sometimes you choose to block. Like if you have a surplus of block cards, you just block, and that's fine. You still have another 10 damage to block versus their attack, and if you only have attacks, you can attack them. So overall, that is the best way. I guess it's still acceptable to enter defensive before they wake up, the turn before they wake up, but you do have to make sure that you're waking them up that turn that you enter defensive mode, or else it's all going to be wasted next turn when they don't wake up. One thing that I find myself doing though versus Laga is focusing too much on blocking the rest of that 10 damage both of those turns, and I'm finding that's a big mistake. I think I was fooled because early on in the series I was able to do that multiple times. I was able to full block both their attacks easily with that strategy, entering defensive mode the first turn they attack, and then I was able to block them, and then I was able to kill them very easily. But recently I've been punished for that, so you kind of just have to take the 20 damage that they're giving you. You got to take the 10. You got to take the 10 more. Maybe you only take 15. Maybe you only take 10. But overall, again, you need to be doing damage, because Lagavulin will debuff you to hell. You will lose all of your ability to attack, you will lose your ability to defend, and you will take a bunch more damage because you didn't sacrifice some earlier. So yeah, make sure you have damage for that too. In a way, you might even need scaling. You either need extra scaling versus Lagavulin, or you just need to sacrifice the 20 HP. At least you have time to set up, though. But yeah, be very careful about taking early elites, because without bonus damage, it gets really hard to take on these elites, because you need to simultaneously find cards that can take on everyone, and you have no help to do so. So, yeah. And finally, versus Sentries, very similar to Lagavulin, very similar to Gremlin Knob, in which you just play a 10 brace card on turn 1, and then take the 10 damage, and then next turn you have 20 block for... turn 2 you have 20 block for both their attacks, and then turn 3 you even have 10 block for the third attack. So, yeah, take some damage to save your HP later. And again, you gotta focus on doing as much damage as possible. Scaling is great versus that fight. And front-loaded damage is really important. So yeah. I think the biggest lesson about this is never take an elite unless you're ready for it. Always ask yourself about all 3 elites and how likely it is to kill you with your deck. But it's not just a simple matter of just the cards. You have this tool available to you to stall for 1 or 2 more turns. And, yeah. The key word there is stall. It's not to save you HP most of the time. Stalling is just so that you can help win the fight. You're still going to have to sacrifice HP. Moving on. This kind of segues into this next point. Guardian is very much about predicting future turns. That's very much about what defensive mode and stasis is all about. Defensive mode, you really need to know your opponent's patterns. And this is something that you're going to have to learn basically just by playing the game. Although Guardian, I guess, can help you with learning it because it's so reliant on it. If Guardian's defensive mode is so reliant on enemy intents, you're going to be forced to pay more attention to what the enemies do. Maybe you even break out the wiki. It really depends on the kind of person, though. Some people absolutely hate doing that. And again, that's fine. You do what's fun, not what's optimal. Like ever. No one should ever do what's optimal over what is fun. The point of playing this game is to have fun. But if you find optimization fun, then this is probably fine to do, to learn. If you already have a knack for understanding the game and the enemies that you're fighting, this is probably going to come somewhat naturally. As long as you frame it under how Guardian uses defensive mode, you should be able to learn it rather quickly. You just have to remember that Guardian's defensive mode is either 10 block this turn and next turn, or 20 block next turn. That's the kind of thing that you're thinking about. How to set up that block to be when you want it to be. But even if you don't understand it, if you play Guardian and learn that way, you will benefit not just your Guardian play, but every other character in the game. Understanding enemies and their intents will be really good for your success, because it means that you understand when you need to be safe. It means that you understand when you can take advantage of your opponent's weakness. And the more tools you have at your disposal, the more likely you are to take advantage of them and win because of it. A lot of Slay the Spire is understanding the enemies, because there are some enemies that need to be built around. Like Gremlin Knob, you can't be taking a bunch of skills. You have to be taking attacks, and honestly, taking attacks for all the elites in Act 1 is important. Understanding the bosses is important. There's so much of just knowing what the enemy is going to do that dictates what you do during your turn. In fact, this even ties back to Curl Up Plus. Because if you don't upgrade Curl Up, you can get a useless card in 2 turns. This is very similar. If you don't know what your opponent is doing, or could do next turn, or the turn after, you don't you won't know what to play now, and then you could just end up wasting energy doing something you shouldn't have done, and then you're weaker for it. So yeah, if you play Guardian and intend on learning those things, you break out the wiki, you take a look, you plan out how you play, you'll benefit with every other character. And Stasis is very similar. Stasis is a little bit more tough, I would say. Defensive mode is great because it's defense. It keeps you safe. You get very rewarded for successfully successfully planning out your block and executing it, because you can see the effects right there and then. Stasis is a bit more difficult because some of it is predicting your enemy, some of it is predicting what you're going to want in a couple turns, and some of it is a bit of both. You really have to have a further understanding of the game for Stasis. Understanding how to balance how much you block versus how much damage you deal. That's kind of the same with the elites. You have to prioritize damage a lot versus elites, but sometimes you can take advantage of block a little bit. Stasis is kind of similar in the way that if you understand what you're likely going to need in mostly 2 turns, maybe 3 turns, you'll be able to make use of your free cards, which are very powerful, as I keep saying. So yeah, the nice thing is that very naturally flows from understanding defensive mode. So if you learn defensive mode, like just look at your enemies just for defensive mode, you will naturally start to fall into patterns of using Stasis for what you need in a couple turns, because you'll already have looked at what you need defensively. You'll be like, oh yeah, I'm probably safe that turn, I can give myself an attack. Oh no, my defense runs out that turn, I should give myself a block card, or maybe even I will be very close to defensive mode again, so let's put a brace card in there, and so on. Sometimes I guess Stasis is just... Sometimes Stasis is just good for other things like scaling or consistency. Like an orb walk can be put into Stasis and just give you strength consistently over a few turns. You don't have to think about the future. You know you need the scaling in that fight, so you're going to put it in. Or Shield Charger, which is the opposite. It gives you block every turn for the next couple turns, or next 3 turns most of the time. Snecko Eye would be the exception, or maybe Idol of Retromation. Yeah. So there's a few things about Stasis that don't say that you absolutely need to have everything planned out, which is nice, and it eases the load a little bit. So yeah, if you want to play this character and really understand that this is probably one of the most important things, this is all just about... this is more of a general Slay the Spire thing and how this character tackles it, but this is more about Slay the Spire in general and about this specific character. This is about this specific character due to a very specific aspect of Slay the Spire. I don't know if any of that made sense. I'm going to move on. Tools for success. This is mostly about deck building. We'll move on to a couple more deck building aspects in a minute. Tools for success. I have AoE under there. We'll talk about that in a minute. I want to talk about a few other things. We talked earlier about how Guardian is a very slow play style. You have a lot of setup that you need to wait for in order to make things happen. But regardless, you are going to need things for the enemies that you're going to be fighting. You need front-loaded damage to take on Act 1 fights and any elites, for that matter. Elites in every act need you to have front-loaded damage. And honestly, hallway fights in every act need you to have front-loaded damage too, unless you are very, very safe, which Guardian can do. Guardian can turtle up for a few turns. I don't think I've ever had a turtle strat. a complete turtle strat as Guardian. I've had something come close, but it does run out. It always runs out eventually. You are never able to have block for every turn of a fight unless you end it. So you are going to run out. So no turtle strat unless you can end the fight quickly. So yeah, front-loaded damage is still important. Strike for Strike has probably become like the poster child for front-loaded damage as Guardian. It's great. It has a downside, but that's fine. 3 damage to self is fine. Thorns is great with it, but honestly it can also act as Brace. And since you're pretty safe anyway, losing a couple HP is probably not a big deal. So take some front-loaded stuff. It'll be useful at all parts of the game. You need block cards. You don't need nearly as many block cards. And honestly, Brace is also really important. But just some flat block cards can be good for hard pull fights in Act 1 and the beginning of Act 2. And past that, you're probably going to need consistent block regularly anyway, because enemies are going to start attacking more consistently and for more, so just having those is important. So front-loaded damage, front-loaded block, and then you also need scaling. Scaling is something that that I sometimes forget about with Guardian. Sometimes I just expect it to happen, and it's very easy for that to happen because Guardian is good at stalling, so sometimes an extra turn is all you need, or an extra 2 turns. Sometimes the scaling comes naturally through stasis, so sometimes I forget about that. It's important not to. You need to be able to have scaling damage of some kind. Scaling block, not so much, but I guess Brace would be the way that you talk about scaling block. Scaling in just the sense that it upgrades your power level during a fight. It doesn't have to mean, or over time during the run, it doesn't mean that you have to like gain a bunch of dexterity or put powers in play. Sometimes just taking more Brace cards counts as scaling block. But scaling damage especially is really important, because even though enemies will only ever attack you for like a maximum of 50, like 50 is probably one of the scariest things you'll have to look at. Enemy HP can be in the hundreds by the end of the game, and even by mid-game, I think. Yeah, Gremlin Leader has more than 100 HP. Book of Stabbing has almost 200, and the Slavers have 150 combined. So yeah, you need to have a lot of scaling damage, and don't forget about defensive mode. But Stasis can also be fine as scaling. So make sure you're just taking enough of each of those. AoE I have here, that stands for Area of Effect, which just means cards that are able to do things to multiple enemies at once. Area of Effect damage is especially important because it helps ease some of the scarier fights. Like Act 1, you have 4 gremlins in the hard pull, and you have 5 slimes. Those will do a lot of damage to you over time just because there's a ton of them. They can all do their own attacks, they can all debuff you. So the more of them there are, the more they can hit you for. But they are vulnerable to cards that can do damage to multiple enemies, or affect enemies in a multiple way. Affect multiple enemies in a way. So Guardian specifically has a kind of a weird area of effect situation, which I think actually fits with the character, because they're a staller, they're slower, they can afford to maybe take a bit more time, even if the fight is scary. Their main AoE cards are in the uncommon pool. That's Time Bomb, Multi-Beam, and Guardian Whirl. Then you also have one in the common and one in the rare. You have Roll Attack and Giga Beam. Those are your 5. But honestly, I still think it's only like 3. Roll Attack, you need to be in defensive mode somehow before that card goes off, So that means you're either taking damage to enter defensive mode, like with sentries specifically. Like I said, you could do it with Gremlin Knob, but sentries are the only AoE fight in Act 1. So if you take 10 damage turn 1, you would also have to draw roll attack turn 2 in order for that to be possible. Which is basically a roulette. You don't know whether that's going to happen or not. Or otherwise, have your brace number be so close to entering defensive that you can spend like 1, maybe 2 energy if you have an energy relic on entering defensive before you play roll attack, because it's so expensive. And it's a big source of your brace to begin with, so you're probably relying on it to enter defensive in the first place rather than playing it after entering defensive. So that doesn't really count unless you have a very solid defensive mode strategy. So do not fall into the trap of using roll attack for AoE unless you already naturally fall into that. Roll attack is a 16 damage, 8 brace card. That is how you should be thinking about it most of the time. Do not think about the AoE aspect. It is a bonus. It is a tool that you should be looking to use occasionally rather than its main use. Moving on to Guardian World, the other one that I don't consider real AoE. Actually, it's kind of similar to Roll Attack. Roll Attack is this very specific condition where you need to be in defensive mode to use it. Which means that you need a perfect draw order or perfect setup. Guardian World is the same way, which surprises some people, at least from what I've seen. Because whenever you look at Guardian, you're like, wow, this dude makes a ton of block. Guardian World should be easy. That's not the case. What you are planning to do with Guardian is use your defensive mode, which is the source of most of your block that these people are looking at, or that even you're looking at and I'm looking at. Your defensive mode, you're using that specifically, you're controlling that specifically to block on turns that you need the block. You're not just randomly entering it. You're not entering it for any other reason to block incoming damage from enemies unless you have like Body Crash and can take advantage of all the block you're stacking. So again, you have this problem where you have a card with some kind of area of effect, but it's asking you to do something that's not fitting into what you're trying to do. It asks you to break what you're doing, make yourself very vulnerable to enemies, just to satisfy the conditions of that specific card. And although Guardian World does do 16 damage to all enemies, in fact I think it upgrades to 20. Let's actually take a look here because I have it. Let me just... yeah, 20, because it hits 5 times. 4 damage 4 times, 4 damage 5 times. Even though it does a lot of damage to enemies for 1 energy, and even though it scales with strength, it's really, really hard to make that work. Because it scales with strength, there is a technical opportunity to maybe make it work in your deck. I think, in fact... yeah, I had a Pandora's Box run. A Pandora's Box swap at the beginning of the run before it even started that gave me Guardian World. And because it was such a small deck, I was drawing it very often, and I was able to take advantage of the other cards in the deck to enter defensive mode somewhat frequently. So I would be able to use Guardian World rather often. And of course, because it has multiple hits, you can scale it with strength very well. The thing is, though, is that unless you are able to consistently, unless you are able to make it consistent in some way, unless you are able to force it to be consistent with your block, block strategy, it is not going to work for you. You cannot just pick it up and use it. You have to force it. And you do not want to force things. Because if you try to force things, your deck will be lopsided in that direction, and you'll have to sacrifice all the other tools of success that you need. You'll have to sacrifice some of your front load. because you need block to play the card. You'll be sacrificing some of your scaling because you need to set up this card. The best thing you can do is probably like the Pandora's box swap, like I did. Like what happened to me. Or maybe there's a world in which you can use stasis on it with your block plan, because you know that in a couple turns you're going to have enough block to be able to play it. But even then, AoE you want to use as soon as possible. Area of effect cards you want to use as soon as possible, because you want to kill these multi-enemy fights as fast as possible. You want to kill one of them, or wipe out a bunch of them, like the slimes, I guess, in Act 1, or the daggers and reptimancers, since they don't have a ton of HP. You want to use it fast as possible, and this just does not help you do this fast, which is what you want from it. On the other hand, we have our 3 other cards. We got Multi-Beam, Time Bomb, and Giga Beam. Multi-Beam is probably the weakest of those 3, but it's still usable. Even on Ironclad, Whirlwind is kind of weak without any kind of strength support. Guardian, because they are a stalling character, and because Multi-Beam has a stasis element attached to it that scales it up if you put it into stasis, it can be okay. Like I said, with Guardian Whirl, you usually don't want to spend turns waiting to use your area of effect. Multi-Beam is a little bit better than that, though, because it scales itself while in stasis, and only ever spends 1 turn in stasis at a time. So, as long as you can put it back into stasis consistently for a few turns, you could use it to wipe out your enemies, especially because it scales with your energy. It has a couple tools innate to it that makes it better to take on multi-enemy fights. And even if you can't scale it up with stasis, just getting like 5 AoE can still be useful. Maybe 10 AoE, maybe 14 if you upgrade it. It's still very good. And of course it scales very well with strength without needing to have all those other, without having to have your, the 20 block requirement that Guardian Whirl has. So it's still takeable in my opinion. The nice thing is that I think it also works better as a long-term scaling tool than Guardian Whirl does. Guardian Whirl scales with strength, but Multi-Beam scales with stasis and strength and energy. So I've had Multi-Beam decks before. I've had decks where Multi-Beam is scaled up in stasis over multiple turns, and then I use that to kill bosses. So yeah, it's probably the weakest front load, but instead of requiring you to have a lot of stuff to make it work, it presents you opportunities to make it stronger. So I think it's a pretty important consideration. Up next, though, is Time Bomb, which is probably, I would say, Guardian's best AoE card just because of how accessible it is. 2 energy for 14 damage is very, very efficient. It's a... Excuse me. 1 second, I need more water. I've been talking for so long. I'm out of water. Time Bomb is less efficient than a Cleave if you look at it as a damage per energy basis. Cleave is 8 for 1 energy. Time Bomb is 7 for 1 energy. But the thing is that the more of AoE you stack into one card, the better it is. Think about it. If you have like a Twin Strike versus 1 enemy, you're doing 10 damage. If you have a Cleave versus 3 enemies, you're doing 24. Even though it's spread out, that is a downside. But let's say you have an upgraded Walker Claw. That's kind of that's kind of proportional to the Twin Strike. Twin Strike is 5 damage 2 times. Walker Claw Plus is 5 damage 4 times. You play Walker Claw Plus versus 1 enemy, you're doing 20 damage. Now, you play Time Bomb versus 3 enemies, you're doing 42 damage. That is a huge, huge upgrade. Because instead of just adding damage to 1 enemy, like these cards do, instead of just adding that damage to 1 enemy, you're adding damage to all enemies. It's kind of the same reason why Dash is so much better than Iron Wave, because even though you're just adding the same amount of block to damage in the same proportion, it's still what you should be comparing it to is your average attack or your average strike. Like an Iron Wave is adding 5 damage to a strike, or 5 block to a strike, kind of, but a dash is adding 5 damage and 10 block to a strike. I guess 4 damage and 10 block to a strike. So don't compare. So when you think about Time Bomb, don't compare it to like Cleave or anything else that does AoE. Compare it to your normal attack, because you're taking AoE for a reason. You're taking it to do something that normal attacks can't do. So 2-cost AoE cards are generally better than 1-cost ones, because the amount of damage that they do is so much more useful in their utility of killing multiple enemies at once. So yeah, 14 damage for 2 energy is great. Generally love 2-cost AoE cards because of this reason. Most people, I don't think, realize when they make these cards that they're very strong, because they look in proportion to like Cleave and they're like, oh, okay, this is about the right proportion. Guardian's a little bit more slow, so 14 damage, a little bit less than 16, that makes sense. But yeah, AoE is extremely useful, so stacking it in proportion to a 1-cost is actually way more strong than the proportion leads you to believe. And then on top of that, it also has the added benefit of accelerating every card in stasis, which gives you even more front load. So long as you have front load, I guess you have to set up stuff beforehand. Yeah, I guess you have to put stuff into stasis beforehand for that acceleration to be useful. It gives you a better single turn. And although having consistency over multiple turns is great, having a single turn means that you can compound your strengths together. The figurative strengths, not the literal buff strength. If you combine, if you use that acceleration to get some kind of vulnerable card out of stasis, and a strength card out of stasis, and maybe even an attack card replacing one of those, or using it to get a block card out is also good. Basically anything that comes out is good. Anything you use the Time Bomb on is good because it's an attack. You're either comboing a ton of damage together in a multi-enemy fight, which is what you want to do, to kill one of them quickly, or multiple of them quickly if you're lucky, or because it's an attack, you want defense at the same time to save yourself any HP that you're leaking from using 2 energy on attacks. So any block cards that come out naturally complement it. Shield Charger this is probably the one card I love to use with Shield Charger, because it simultaneously, because even though it uses up one of your turns of Shield Charger, you're using it on a turn that you're using a lot of your energy on offense, which is great, because any turn that you can afford to use a lot of your energy on offense gets you that much closer to ending the fight, and ending a fight is good. So yeah, Time Bomb is great. There's very few bad interactions with it, and the more stuff you have in stasis, the better it is. The one thing it's probably bad at is if you set up some kind of... If you really need a card on a certain turn, and Time Bomb is getting it out 1 turn earlier. That is something that you're going to want to think about, because Time Bomb is such a powerful effect, you're probably going to want to play it most of the time you draw it. I guess the major exception would be single enemy fights. You could probably afford not to, but most of the time you're probably going to want to play it just for the damage in general, you know? So, yeah, Time Bomb, probably the best one. And finally, there's Giga Beam. Giga Beam has the restriction of their downside, where you're stunned the next turn after you play it. Most of the time you can play around this in some way. There's a lot more counterplay than it looks like. Stunning is a very scary ability, because it's a turn that you're either being attacked for that you can't block at all, or it's a turn that you need to be taking advantage of damage-wise. Thankfully, Giga Beam is so much damage that usually losing out on a turn of damage is fine. In response, you might not have been able to match it otherwise. also it's AoE. It's a lot of AoE, so you can handle multi-enemy fights very, very well. And then the downside can be played around simply because if you know the attack patterns from learning the enemy attack patterns, you might have drawn Giga Beam on a turn that you can afford to play it. Because next turn they're not attacking. For example, you have defensive mode. If you're able to enter defensive mode when you play Giga Beam, you will have block for next turn, and then maybe you can just tank that damage with your block. Maybe you can afford to leak somewhere under 5 HP, or maybe under 10 HP if you really need to play the card. It scales with strength multiple times. An upgrade on this card is really important. So that if you have any strength that benefits from it 4 times instead of 2, meaning that it's much more able to be played to end a fight, or much more worth the downtime. And then it's also a debuff, so you can reduce it with Overload Plus, Onyx, Resilient Plate, or I guess some of the relics that can remove stuff, like Orange Pellets, or maybe even Clockwork Souvenir or an Artifact Potion. All that kind of stuff is fun. If you have Tiny Bowler Hat, what do you call it? Champ's card can remove it. Or you can play Champ's card first if you're under half HP for 3 strength, and then play Giga Beam to kill things. And I think the biggest thing about Giga Beam is that even if you can't play it, because there will be times, I'm very big on the consistency, and I'm still saying it's good, even though there are times where it will be inconsistent and you can't play it on the first draw. It's worth still having in the deck as a dead card in the first draw, so that the second time you draw it, it's worth playing, and it will end the fight or be playable for any of the reasons that we just stated. It does a lot of damage, and I think it's worth taking for Act 2 specifically. And past Act 2, you probably need some support to give it more damage or more safety from the stun turn. But it's really cool because it helps you through the early parts of the game where Guardian struggles most, Act 1, and you get it in Act 1 if you're lucky, right, to kill Act 1 things, but you can still press your advantage in Act 2, and it gives you the opportunity to keep it relevant in Act 3 and beyond. So, while I think that Time Bomb is more accessible, because it's an uncommon, it doesn't cost a boss card reward, or a ton of support in order to be able to use, Giga Beam is still so powerful that I think it's worth taking a lot of the time. So yeah, make sure... honestly, the big takeaway from this that I wanted to say was that AoE is such an important tool in general for any character because of multi-enemy fights, and Guardian has trouble accessing it because there's only 5. There's 5 of them, but the 1 in common is bad, 1 in uncommon is bad, so you're left with 2 in uncommon and 1 in rare. So you kind of want to prioritize taking one if you're offered it, in order to be able to better handle those fights, because they're scary, and because you need to survive early game, and Reptomancer. So yeah, moving on. Balancing deck density. This is a pretty big one. There's a lot of things that you have to balance. This is a really advanced kind of thing that you have to get used to. Something that definitely gets more important in the higher ascensions. You can probably get away without it in lower ascensions as much, because if you do anything strong in lower ascensions, you'll be rewarded for it. So you just have to make sure that you find something strong. That still requires skill. I'm not dissing lower ascension players. A lot of the stuff that you have to balance in your deck is your front load, your block, your scaling. But there's multiple things with Guardian that you need to balance, like your stasis. You have only 3 stasis slots unless you have something else to increase them, or some acceleration. There's only 2 sources of increase them in your card pool. That's Stasis Strike, which costs 2 energy and is an attack, or Time Capacitor, which is a power. Those are both uncommon cards, which means they're not guaranteed. And there's a rare relic, which you're rarely ever going to see. Cryo Chamber. Rare relics they're like the definition of rare. More rare than rare cards. So more rare than rare. Actually, more rare than rare events. Yeah, more rare than rare events too, I would say. Anyways, so what was I saying? Stasis, right. So you're going to be stuck on 3 stasis slots most of the time, with a few exceptions. So you want to be balancing how much stasis you have in your deck proportionally with how many cards you have. You want to be making use of those 3 stasis slots as much as possible, because you need to be taking advantage of all your free cards in order to power up. You cannot be leaving those unused unless you have a really strong strategy in some other area. So making sure that you have enough for that, but also don't take too much stasis is really important. If you have too much stasis, then you're wasting part of your card effects on stuff that does nothing. Like, imagine if your stasis slots are full and you have a suspension, that card does absolutely nothing. I guess if you upgrade it, it doesn't take a card draw. I suppose that's fine. Actually, it's probably one of the better ways. But if it's unupgraded, you're gonna just suffer you're gonna just suffer having one less card in your hand. Yeah, so you have to balance how much stasis you have. Some acceleration is probably a good idea so that you can take more stasis and take more advantage of your 0-cost cards. I don't think I've been doing that enough. I'm going to see if I can find more opportunities to. Or maybe I take more stasis slots more often. Or maybe I take some of the cards that stay in stasis less often. Because even though those effects are good, I'm not getting more value out of the rest of my deck, which I actually kind of need to do. Because I built the rest of my deck to give me more power, and if I'm not getting them for free, then it's going to be slower, no matter how good the effects are in my stasis already. There's also balancing Brace. You need to balance how much Brace is in your deck. Mostly, that's just making sure you have enough. You don't really have an upper bound on how much Brace you need. Actually, that's not true. Having too much Brace means it's too easy to enter defensive, which is weird, but under circumstances that happen pretty often, if you enter defensive too much, then it's going to be harder to enter it when you need it. Because every time you enter defensive with Brace, you increase your Brace counter requirement by 10. You start at 20. After the first time you enter defensive, it goes to 30 Brace. Then after that time it goes to 40, then 50, and then it stops at 50. But 50 is still a lot. So if you have a ton of Brace in your deck and you're entering defensive mode like crazy, it can feel nice on the first few turns, but then it gets really hard to re-enter defensive if the fight's still going. And that's especially important in Act 3 elites and the bosses of the game. So there is kind of an upper bound on Brace. You need enough in order to be able to enter defensive mode when you need it, but not so much that like you have to sacrifice playing cards because it puts you into defensive mode too early. The only exceptions to that upper bound would be for things that really, really like you having a lot of block, such as cards that are very aggressively, such as strategies that are very aggressive scaling, or Body Crash. If you have very aggressive scaling, then keeping yourself safe while you do that scaling and then just cashing out all that damage at once can end a fight before you run out of defensive mode. You have to still be careful against bosses, though. And Body Crash is Body Crash. So, and there was one more thing. Let me take a look at my notes, actually. I had it there. Brace stasis, setup, and front load. Oh yeah, setup. I talk about front load. I mentioned setup for a second, but I didn't talk about it. Guardian is so setup heavy that I often find myself with so much setup in my deck and barely any front load. It feels really bad. Sometimes it's felt unavoidable. Maybe it's not as unavoidable as I think, but I'm probably going to have to get much better at the character, despite having this much mastery over them already. There's always room to improve in this game. I love it, and I love this character. But yeah, balancing the amount of setup in your deck is so important, because if it's tempting to have so much setup because because it's awesome to get stronger over time. It really is. It feels great to have to live out the power fantasy. You get yourself super strong and then you have complete dominance over the enemy. But if you have too much setup, you're going to get smacked in the first terms of the fight, and then you're never going to get to see it. So, unfortunately, Guardian has so much setup required that it can be really hard to get enough front load in the deck. Maybe that's why I need more gems in my game. But yeah, just keep an eye out for that. Maybe the best way of helping this out, if you're struggling with balancing any part of your deck, if you've noticed in your runs that you have not enough of something or too much of something else, maybe the best way to handle that is to prioritize card removes more. Prioritizing card removes means that the rest of your good cards have a better presence in your deck. Your turns get more consistent, and even the stuff that is a little bit on the low side of your balance can still come in often enough for you to win. So I might start doing that while I'm still learning some of the stuff that I've been talking about here. I still have to improve in some of these areas, so maybe I prioritize card removes more. I did talk about how shops don't often have cards that Guardian wants, so maybe that's a way to take advantage of it anyway. Relics are still good, and potions are still good, but maybe going to more shops for card removes specifically is a good idea. And then I can learn more from that. People say that the best way to learn is to fail, but I think that a healthy mix of failure and success is good. Or at the very least, risk-taking with more success can be good. Taking calculated risks and having them pay off can also teach you things. I don't think it's restricted to failure at all. So, yeah, give yourself room to grow in that area. And then finally identifying win cons here. Oh man. It's a good thing I talked about some of the cards in that thing, because this is going to go a while. Alright. Moving on. Identifying win cons. This is mostly just about how Guardian does damage. Because Guardian's block, like I said, is mostly defensive mode. You are going to need something to supplement it, whether good front-loaded block cards, or stasis, or dexterity scaling. Sometimes dexterity scaling can be the answer to help out with that as well. Although you do need to block in order for that to work. You need to play block cards. That's a big thing about dexterity scaling. You can have 10 dex, but if you have one bad turn, you're going to lose. Especially against the heart. But anyway, so identifying a win condition. Guardian is a slow and steady character, so although sometimes other characters can have like wombo combos that you can do, Guardian often doesn't have those. I've only had a couple of them, and they've all surprised me every time they've happened. Win cons are mostly going to be centered around doing damage steadily over time. So what you want to look for are strength. You want to look for thorns sometimes. Thorns are definitely not the thing that you want to prioritize. I don't think you ever make a thorns deck unless you get very lucky with the amount of thorns you're finding. And maybe keeping some of them with like an ancient construct, because debuff reduction only goes to a max of 2, and you have 4 temporary thorns. So yeah, thorns can be very helpful because I put stress just now on how you need to play block cards with dexterity. You don't need to play attack cards with thorns like you need to play attack cards with strength. Thorns will passively do damage for you. That's good damage scaling. And I've been surprised by how many thorns I can actually keep with something like what do you call it, shield spikes. If I've been in defensive mode surprisingly often for shield spikes, although maybe I'm just thinking about the heart, because I take a bunch of damage on turn 2, and then I'm in defensive mode for several turns, and then I play shield spikes for the permanent thorns then. Because it is kind of hard to be in defensive mode for those thorns, just like it is hard to be with roll attack. But sometimes it's possible. Sometimes it's possible for both. I think I might prioritize playing roll attack for brace more often than I prioritize shield spikes for brace, because it's already a block card. Who knows? Maybe it's just because it's uncommon that I remember roll attack more. But yeah, also Thorns can be good if you don't have very many attack cards. Like if maybe you're relying on stasis for stuff more. Thorns can be good, especially because you can save Thorns for an attack turn. And it works well with a slow play style, because the more turns that you have to wait, the more turns that enemies are going to be attacking you. So taking some Thorns is good. Strength, like I said, there are a number of multi-attacks. You can also turn Twin Slam into more than a ×2 if you have Shiv. I guess you can also turn other common attacks with sockets into multi-attack with Shivs. Let's see what else is there for damage. I guess it's flavors of strength then? Like Construction Form. Construction Form can be part of your win condition, damage-wise. Oh yeah, Stasis. That was the other big one. Stasising big attack cards, damage cards of some kind, can be a great way to just do damage. You don't need to have strength to do damage with attacks with this character. If you have enough stasis, you're getting cards for free. There's also floating orbs, which I think is getting nerfed somewhat soon. I don't know. I don't know how they schedule their stuff. There was talk about a lot of stuff. There's always talk about buffs and nerfs on the server, the Discord server. But we had Collector come out, and there were barely any changes to other characters. So who knows when it comes out. Yeah, floating orbs can be one though as well, with more with zero cost cards. I'm struggling to find out more, but usually it's enough between those things. Strength and stasis are both very powerful. Thorns helps somewhat. Am I missing something? Body Crash, I guess, is another one. But yeah, just making sure that you have some kind of scaling damage is really important. I've actually found myself lacking scaling damage, again, because I've gotten too used to stasis taking care of stuff for me. I said that about Act 1, going into an Act 1 boss, but I think it also applies to the rest of the game, because that's happened very similarly to, like, right before the Act 3 bosses. Like, mid-Act 3, I realized that I don't have the scaling I thought I did for damage, and then I struggle against the rest of the game. So, yeah, making sure that you are finding some kind of scaling and using it is really important, especially in the damage department. That could be another way to use gems. Like, 2 of the damage gems are commons, and if you take enough of them, maybe that could act as some kind of pseudo-scaling. Take enough strength and thorns gems and just socketed them into things. You get them consistently enough during turns to do more damage. The nice thing is that you don't need as much of this as you need on other characters, because Guardian is slow. You can stall for more turns. You need to do proportionally less damage in order to kill enemies. So, whenever you take a look at something that can make you stronger during a fight, something that isn't front-loaded, but can scale you up during a fight, you have to make sure that you take a serious look at it. see if you can afford to take it, and see how you could take advantage of it, either in your current deck or in the future of your deck. If you're looking at the future, you have to look at how likely that is. But don't just blow off a card because it doesn't fit what your deck does immediately. You might have to improve on its current identity in order to finish off at the power level that you need. Alright, the final cards. These are here because I didn't talk about them in any of the other episodes, I don't think. I hope I'm not missing any. I hope I'm not repeating any, but we're going to do it. I did already talk about Guardian Whirl and Gigabeam, though, so I'm going to move away from those. And we're going to move on to Gem Finder. And no, I didn't talk about this in the Gem episode, go figure. I just looked at gems in their sockets, and that was not very smart. Gem Finder at this... well, maybe I did talk about this, I forget. I'm sorry if I did, whatever, we'll get to hear it again. At the end of combat, you may choose to add a common gem to your deck. That was not the right word order, but it meant the same thing. So you get a choice of 3. There are only 4 common gems: Strength, Dex, Thorns, and Brace. So you get a choice of 3, which means you're going to be... If you're looking for a specific gem, you're probably going to find it in there. If you're looking for multiple gems, which is often the case, you will find one of the 2 in every single reward, and then you can make a plan to balance those out over time, so you have the best chance of finding all of them by the time you have to sock it. So the thing is about Gem Finder is that you need to have some kind of plan with these gems. Debuff Reduction is the obvious one. If you have Debuff Reduction, this is probably insane. You just socket them in a bunch of cards, you use your Debuff Reduction, bam, you have permanent Strength, permanent Dex, maybe permanent Thorns. That's great. You don't have to ever worry about Brace because you're always offered a choice of 3. It's awesome. So, having a bunch of Strength gems is probably sort of weak. And honestly, I would think a bunch of Thorns gems is also pretty weak. Just because they're damage. And like I said, you need defense a lot more than you need damage. No, you need damage a lot more than you need defense. And these are not proportional to the amount of defense that you get from Dexterity or even Brace to a certain extent. So having a lot of... So like if you have enough Strength gems in your deck that you're always getting 1 Strength gem per turn, that's basically like having an Inflame in play. You have 2 permanent Strength, and that's it. 4 Thorns, maybe a little bit better. It depends on the deck, I guess. It's pretty good. But again, only a very limited amount of damage that you're getting from that. However, if you have a lot of Dexterity gems, if you have any way to scale that up, if you have like 1 single Onyx in the deck, you're getting Dexterity very slowly, but you only need a little bit of Dexterity with some block cards in order for that to really pay off versus the enemies you're fighting, because they will not attack for as much as you're attacking them. So that could be part of a block plan. Alternatively, you could put a bunch of Brace gems into your thing, into your cards, and then have that be your part of your block plan. Have a very, very consistent defensive mode setup, so that you can enter defensive mode whenever you want. You can set up defensive mode for future turns however you want, and be very safe that way. So this is all about making a plan about how your deck is going to get stronger in the future. Common gems are not great, but they are the scaling gems, right? In the uncommons, you have, you have a Shiv, a Ward, Vulnerable, you have the Mini Piercing Whale, you have a Draw gem and an Accelerate gem. And then in rare, you have Energy and Debuff Reduction with Onyx. Onyx is probably the most scaling, and most of the rest of those are front load. I guess Vulnerable is also scaling in a way. It makes you more power. It makes you do more damage over time. Amethyst, the Mini Piercing Whale, is good against specific enemies in specific times, but it's not really scaling because it doesn't make you permanently powerful. Vulnerable at least helps do a bunch of damage at once, which I consider scaling. Helps wombo combos. But Draw, Energy, Accelerate, Shiv and Ward are all immediate benefits. So they won't really help you get stronger during the course of a fight. Energy and Draw are unique because they're such powerful front-loaded effects that you might not care that they're front-loaded. They might just be good anyways and can help you with the fight anyway. Like, they're just that powerful. Accelerate can also be that way, although it's a little bit weaker than both, I would say. But yeah, the common gems are the way... They're a scaling strategy. If you really need scaling in some way, damage or block, this might be a way to help with that. So, yeah, this is basically help me find a scaling plan, whether damage or block. I guess maybe in some circumstances both. That's probably the debuff reduction route, but usually you want either one or the other. So, this is kind of hard to justify for me. Common gems are not... They don't feel great. And I haven't been taking a lot of gems or sockets or anything. You kind of also need enough sockets for this to be good. So it's very conditional. But overall, it has a use. So I'm not upset with it. I wonder if I could take this at the beginning of a run. It's a little bit risky because if you go for a long time without a campfire, you're not socketing gems, and then you have a bunch of unsocketed gems. So I probably wouldn't take it at Niao, unless I had a very specific route that I wanted to go for. And honestly, I don't even take rare cards at Niao anyway, so... moving on, Gen Cannon. I don't know what to say about this, I'll be honest. I've had so much trouble with gems recently, but I was using this card so much before the series began, because I was having so many gems. So I'm kind of at a loss here, because I think I'm not taking advantage of gems as much as I want to, or as much as I should. And if you take enough gems, this card can one-shot Act 2. You don't have to worry about like any of the enemies as soon as you draw this card. You just draw this, you play it, you don't care about losing all your gems. It does insane amounts of damage if you have those gems in play. I just have not had a lot of gems in my recent strategies. So maybe it's conditional? I put this in S tier back when I did my tier list at the beginning of this series, after episode 10. I put this in S tier because of how much I was using it and how much damage it was doing. But recently it just hasn't felt that way. So, if you find that you're taking a lot of gems, like, why aren't you taking this card? You probably are. You probably already know how strong this is in your runs. Yeah, the one downside of this, I guess, is like Act 3 bosses and Act 4. Because losing all your gems, this will not do enough damage to take those out. Everywhere else, it will be fine, though. We'll have to see by the end of this series whether I actually succeed in learning about gems or not, or if I have a conclusion to make about them. Because if I am right about my current play, like, if my current play is actually correct and taking gems is not as good as they should be, then this isn't actually very good, and maybe it could use a buff. But that's, I guess, the extent of what I can say about it. Upgrades at 1 cost, which is... It's honestly felt unnecessary, which is weird for an energy upgrade. Energy upgrades are usually really, really good, but here, like, anytime I've used this and had a ton of gems, it's just done so much damage that it didn't matter. So, anyway, moving on, Construction Form. Probably my favorite card out of Guardian's Kit, although sometimes it can get repetitive if I get it too much. Gain 2 buffer at the start of each turn. If you have buffer, gain 1 strength. There have been people that have said that this card is too weak. I think it is kind of a bit of an unintuitive card to see the value in, because buffer on defect is already kind of weak. You have to upgrade it to make it really relevant past Act 1, and it's good under certain scenarios, but it has some weaknesses, like you can lose buffer to 1 damage. So multi-attacks can very much just shred it. And the fact that since this costs 3 and has that second part attached for the scaling strength, I think puts people off. Because if it's easy to lose the buffer, you're not going to gain the strength. So if you're relying on this card at all, you have a problem as soon as you lose those buffers. Here's the deal, though. What I've learned in my runs when I've taken this card is that it's absolutely insane. Like, overpowered for what it is. It would be very easy to over-nerf this card, but it's very strong as is, for a couple reasons. One, even though it costs 3, you don't have to spend an upgrade on this to get 2 buffer. So it's already being relevant in terms of the front-loaded block area. So that's a big thing. And secondly, the way that it happens to work out, which is really cool because you barely ever get to say that about something. I don't think this was intentional, but the way that this works out is that the fights where you lose the buffer, you don't care about the strength gain. And the fights where you do care about the strength gain, you don't lose the buffer. So you always have what part of this card you need for your current fight. Like, for hallway fights, you probably need the buffer. For bosses, you need the strength. For elites, it can maybe vary. You might have a bit of an issue. In Act 3 specifically, I think in Act 2 you probably still want the buffer. Maybe you want the strength versus Gremlin Leader or Book of Stabbing, but that's usually not that hard. You can probably keep the buffers until, what do you call it? The 24, the single attack turn against Book of Stabbing, and then you only just lose 1 for that turn. Because the first couple turns are not that hard to block, especially with defensive mode. So if you manage to get this in play, you're probably good. Gain the strength over a few turns. So yeah, this, I guess, unless the devs are extremely big brain, by complete luck, this is a great card, because the fights that happen to make this second part bad, you don't care about it, and the fights that happen to need the strength don't care about the buffer. Like, you'll keep it because they do damage steadily and you'll be able to block it. So that's great. Also, people have commented on gaining 1 strength per turn, being half a demon form, maybe even a third of a demon form if you have the demon form upgraded. Because if you upgrade this, just removes the ethereal. But since this is a slow character, like I've said before, gaining 1 strength per turn is absolutely fine. If you have 8 strength on, like, Ironclad, you can beat a boss fight. You can beat the heart. On Guardian, if you have 5 strength, you can beat Niao. Maybe 6. Maybe you need a little bit more. But you can supplement this with whatever other... Well, okay, so let me clarify. 8 strength on Ironclad without Demon Form. If you have Demon Form, you gotta put a lot more resources into making sure that you don't take damage when you play it, or you can heal back the stuff. If you play Spot Weakness twice, or once with a couple in Flames, or have a limit break to get you to 8 strength or something, you can beat the heart, because you've got the strength quickly and didn't cost very much energy. Here, because Guardian is so safe and so slow, 5 strength is enough to do exactly like that. Do exactly the same things. You can dump your strength into multi-attacks, which Guardian has a number of, and he's pretty good at. You got Polybeams, you got your Shivs, you got Walker Claw. Sometimes you have Refracted Beam. You have Stasis for 0-cost ones, extra attacks, which is great. So 1 strength per turn is actually not that bad. So this card ends up being extremely strong, from my experience. You will either be very safe, or you will scale up as much as you need. The safety especially has been prevalent, probably because most fights prefer you to have the buffer than the strength. So I will gladly pay 1 more energy to not have to upgrade this card to get 2 buffer. Also, the really, really broken runs I've had usually have more than 1 construction form, because not only do you stack the buffer, you stack the passive. So it's easier to keep the passive. You get more safety, and it's easier to keep the passive strength, which scales you get 2 strength per turn as well. So it's kind of like doubling twice. You get 4 times as much power for having 2 construction forms. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Love this card. It's very fun so long as it doesn't get overused, because eventually this much safety gets boring. Moving on. Compile package. Oh god. This is, I guess, long story short, I'm not going to go super in-depth with this. Long story short, this card is general value. Maybe there's a way to build into specific parts of this. Like maybe if you were to look at everything that Compile Package can do and closely analyze it, you could build your deck around a few packages and have plans for each one. Maybe. But generally, I would say it's easier to just treat this as general value. Like maybe you come out of the Act 1 boss fight, you take this card for Act 2 because you don't have a strong identity in your deck yet. And this does a great job at just giving you more power. It gives you a package which contains 3 cards of a certain theme, and the cards are all part of Guardian's normal card pool. Like, for example, Floating Orbs. The Spirit Guardian package, the baseball, their package gives you Spheric Shield, which is basically the Impervious of this character. It gives you Floating Orbs and Metallicize. That's a great combination of cards because it gives you safety and scaling at once for only 3 energy, and that's excluding Metallicize. We don't think about Metallicize there. So yeah, Floating Orbs and Spheric Shield, those are great, especially because Floating Orbs is generally useful because you'll be doing stasis and gem things, and those very naturally have 0 costs attached. So that's a very easy package to just take in most cases, because it gives you safety all the way through Act 2, and it gives you stuff for Act 3. There's other packages that give you general value too, like the Sentry package. Gives you some damage and some weak. It can take up stasis slots, or you can exhaust them. So that would be secondary to Spirit Guardian, but it can also be fine, especially because consistent weaken is really hard to come by. So that's pretty cool. Let's see, there's Walker. The Orb Walker package isn't great because it costs too much energy, but it's a possibility. I've used it sometimes for strength scaling and dumping extra damage. There's the Shapes package, which gives you, Time Bomb. So I guess if you really need AoE, you take that one. It also gives you a Repulsor and Spiker Protocol, which aren't great, but Time Bomb is good now. Donu Deka The Donu Deka is called the Ancients package. It gives you Ancient Power, the 10th Strength and Vulnerable card. It gives you Ancient Construct and Overload. And that package I've used a few times for really strong scaling. So it's also good in boss fights if you need extra scaling. That's cool. Let's see what else. I said Spirit Guardian, Sentry, Donu Deka, Shapes. There's 3 more. Automaton, that's great too because it's a bunch of front-loaded damage. Giga Beam, it also has a 0 cost 8 damage attack, which is great. And it has a Resilient Plate in it, which means that you can, if you have 4 energy, you can remove the debuff of the, of the stun from Giga Beam as well in the same exact hand every time. So that's cool. And upgraded, you get more damage out of the Giga Beam and the 0 cost attack. Plus 2, plus 4, plus 6 extra damage to a single enemy is pretty significant. And if you have strength, of course, the Giga Beam scales up even further. Remember, Compile package upgrades to upgraded packages, which give you 3 upgraded versions of the cards. So yeah, that's Giga Beam, that's 5. Then we have Defect and 1 more. What's the last one? I forget. I said Spirit Guardian, Sentries, Ancients, Automaton. Oh god. Orb Walker, Shapes. Okay, I did get 6. And then Defect. Defect package as Stasis. It's another way to scale. So, basically, you have 2 defensive packages. You got 2 scaling packages, because defect package scales your stasis. It gives you an extra stasis slot and a couple stasis cards. Two defensive packages, 2 stasis packages, and then a few other miscellaneous things. Orb Walker. Orb Walker. Automaton is good for front-loaded damage, so that's another solid one. Orb Walker and Shapes. Those are the 2 weird ones. But Shapes can still give you like AoE if you need it. So yeah, overall, just good general value. It handles a lot of different situations. It's inconsistent, which is a downside, but sometimes inconsistency can be overcome by the nature of forcing it to be consistent. And what I mean by that is, just like you make risks consistent by taking more of them, this becomes consistent by taking more fights with it. So most of the time you're going to have a relevant package that helps you, and the few times that don't, you lose some HP, but it's made up for by the fact that you didn't lose HP in those other fights. So this is great. I'm not sure how much value you get from upgrading this. Sometimes I feel like this is great upgraded, sometimes I feel like it's underwhelming upgraded. I haven't really figured it out yet. Anyway, Body Crash, we'll just move on. Body Crash, this used to be 1 cost uncommon. It was way too OP. Now it's a little bit underpowered, but it's only in the sense that it's what do you call it? Situational. It's kind of rough to make this work now, but that kind of makes sense. Guardian can gain insane amounts of block. That hasn't changed. So the big inconsistencies with this card are the fact that it costs 2, and that it's rare. You can't find it as often now, and it costing 2 means it's more expensive and harder to use in stasis. It comes out in 3 turns, which is really hard to plan around, because defensive mode only lasts 2 turns. If you have some accelerate, this can be a lot better, actually, now that I think about it. But overall, if you really need damage and you're doing really well at defense, this is great supplemental damage. It is no longer a single carry card. Even if you manage to get a ton of block with this card and manage to line it up consistently, it's not going to be your single damage. Unless, I guess, as usual, you're very lucky. Yeah, so this will be good supplemental damage. It's definitely still worth being a rare. You just have to be careful. Gain 5 block, I guess, is okay, but, like, it's not good front load. I will say that. It's really not good front load. Moving on, Ancient Construct. Another one I could have talked about in the Gems episode, but I didn't. Upgrades to gain 2 artifact immediately. If the start of your turn you have no artifact, gain 1 artifact. Several problems with this card, one being that it's so expensive, another one being that this is conditional for some reason, and thirdly that temp buffs are actually not as prominent as usual. Did I mention that it's slow? No, I didn't. I didn't say slow. Yeah, so this is slow and inconsistent and expensive. It's really powerful if you can get it to work. I will say that. With strength gems, you get 2 strength per turn, which is like the unupgraded demon form. But again, you don't need as much strength on Guardian, so it might as well be upgraded. With dexterity, this goes off like crazy. With thorns, you're just... what are you doing? You're crazy. I guess it doesn't hurt to have a couple thorns. It is worth noting, though, that like with Piercing Hide, which has the socket, the natural thorns from Piercing Hide comes before the socket, so you're going to use artifact on that first. And since you can only have 1 artifact at a time, for some reason, you'll get the thorns every time and then lose out on any other temp buff that's in the card. Another nice thing about this is that it can sometimes cancel out other debuffs. Like, this can work with Giga Beam. I think I did that once. It was very fun. Yeah, it was a compile package with Giga Beam. It might have been multiple compile packages where I got this one and the Automaton one. On different turns, of course, so the artifact had time to come in. Or I might have had compile package with an actual Giga Beam. I don't remember. But yeah, that can happen sometimes. It's not great at blocking enemy debuffs, because those usually come turn 1. And this needs a turn. Or you draw at turn 1 with the upgrade. But yeah, overall, it has so many downsides. It doesn't feel strong enough to be a rare. Right, well, when it works, it's definitely rare, which is probably why it is rare here. Overall, though, it costs so much to make work. I wonder if it's worth speculating into, now that I think about it. Maybe not. It's probably a dead card for a long time. But, like, it's strong enough that, like, if you build into it, you probably get a huge payoff if you don't die. I don't think it's worth it, though. I would very much like to see this cost 2 at base. Or not have the restriction of have no artifact. You always just gain 1 artifact. Or have this be gain 1 artifact immediately, upgrade to gain 3. There's a lot of ways that this could be much better. It needs to get rid of one of those things. It needs to get rid of... it needs to either get rid of its expensiveness, or its slowness, or its inconsistency. That's what you need. You need to get rid of one of those 3 things, I think. I think keeping the other 2 things is fine. If you get rid of one of those things, at base, like, this upgrade technically gives you 2 artifacts to start, but it needs to be that way unupgraded, otherwise it's too much. I want to be able to take this card, I want to be able to enjoy it. Right now, it's too much. So, yeah. Take away one of those things to buff this card, I would love it. But I guess to you, who, I guess my real audience is not the devs, but people learning to play, this is probably too slow. If you're on low Ascension, go nuts. You're probably not going to be punished for taking this as much as high Ascension, so have fun with all the temp debuffs, or the temp buffs that get cancelled by the artifact. You will have a very fun time. The temp buff canceling is probably one of the most fun things you can do about this character. I just wish it had more support. So if you're playing at high Ascension, or looking to improve in general, this is probably not worth taking most of the time. But as always, every card has a time where it's good, a time and a place. So always look for opportunities, because this has a lot of potential. It's just very, very hard to get there. Up next is Repulsor. This has not been as useful as I thought it was. This was very easy to take in Downfall mode when I played it. But looking back, I have a theory that that's because of the key breaking. It used to give you buffs during every fight instead of the bosses for a cost of 100 souls instead of 50. Even though it was almost useless until the Act 4 boss, I could take one of these very comfortably. Or the Act 4 in general. I could take one of these very comfortably and then not be punished for it, just have a dead card in the deck in preparation for Act 4 so that I wasn't punished for having bad draws. But going up the Spire, it really has felt awful, despite the fact that there are more statuses in normal Slay the Spire than other places. I used to really defend this card, saying that, like, it handles one of Guardian's biggest weaknesses, and that they don't have very much draw in their deck, or in their card pool. So this handles the times where that would be very severely punished with status and curses. Now I'm not convinced at all. I think this card just needs to go, honestly. And I realize that that's in light of me playing normal mode, but with the key breaking no longer giving you buffs in normal fights to help shore this up, you can't take this. And honestly, another big thing about just removing this card in general is just, it doesn't interact with anything Guardian does. It's not a fun card at all. And fun is a huge, huge part of designing a character. Why would you allow something to be unfun about a character? That's not a choice I would ever make. Balance is important, but balance exists to serve fun, not the other way around. Balance exists because balance is fun. But if you balance in a way that isn't fun, then you've just thrown away your main objective. Anyway, I would not suggest taking this card. If you find it works, unless you find it works for you, I guess, Maybe it's still necessary for Niao, and maybe you can still get away with it without the keys. I haven't played Downfall mode in a while, but yeah, this card does not fit in with Guardian. It's not going to help you except in these very specific scenarios, and maybe you should be looking for different ways to make statuses and curses not so punishing. Maybe you take a little bit more card draw, you know, or maybe you take something like a planning. You take the downside of cards that you can't control being put into stasis for the upside of drawing through your deck faster. Or you invest more into stasis in general, so that whenever the statuses and curses come, you can get cards out anyway. But yeah, this is not a great card. The upgrade makes it more bearable. This might actually be a reason to upgrade Compile package, because this is part of the Shapes package. Overall, not a great card. Refracted Beam, one of the multi-attack cards that Guardian has to dump strength into. It has a slight advantage over Walker Claw, which we'll talk about in a bit, and it hits one more time. However, you need a lot of strength for that to really pay off, because this card only hits one more time and does so much less base damage. Also, it's uncommon. Also, this passive means jack shit. You can be upgraded any number of times. There is a time and place for every card, like I said. So, like, if you have a small deck, and if you can make this card come back very quickly, then maybe it's worth dumping upgrades into. But honestly, I would rather upgrade my other cards. Maybe you can make it work. Like, Ironclad has this inherent advantage that they have exhaust in their kit, which means that they can thin their deck down to very small sizes and then just redraw their Searing Blow over and over. Guardian doesn't have any way to exhaust the cards in their deck. No way at all. Even Defect has Recycle, and that's their only card to do it, but Guardian has none. So the way to recur this card would either be removals with a ton of removals so you have a small deck, or reroute and recover. Reroute and recover would get this card back faster. And you need Accelerate, because this card costs 2, it will go into stasis for 3 turns. And you need a lot of strength scaling. But if you get this somewhere up in the 9 to 10 range, it can do very well. I have had runs with this. Multiple runs, I think. I've had 2. with using the passive. I've had more runs where I just take this to dump strength, and it's been good when I have a bit more strength and I really need any multi-attack card, and I haven't found a Walker Claw or a Polybeam. This can be fine. I would not suggest taking this, though. This passive is very hard to make work. And honestly, Searing Blow is kind of hard to make work, unless you're on low Ascension, again. Because it still requires you to build your entire deck around it. And this is no exception, except you also have to get strength. You have to build stasis in a specific way, and even though building a deck around a single card is already difficult for Ironclad, it's even more difficult for Guardian. Again, though, do what's fun, and always, like, never pass on an opportunity if it could legitimately help you out. So if you look at your deck and you see that you can do this, go for it. Polybeam, I'd say this is just a good card to dump strength into. I think you need at least 4 strength for this to be good, though. Maybe 3. 4 is where I'm comfortable saying you need. Because the random enemy thing really hurts. You cannot just take this as a front-loaded damage card. You will suffer versus sentries and any multi-enemy fight. Upgrade is 5, which is cool, I guess. Also, it's cheap for 1 energy. It's a sword boomerang, right? But with 1 more hit, which is really cool. It'd be great if you have strength and vulnerable and all that. It's really just, don't take this as front load. Take it if you have strength. It's really that simple. I wonder if it's too simple. Honestly, if this card needs changes, it's probably much lower priority than some of the other stuff in this guy's kit. Overload. I barely ever take this. Maybe I should take it more. It's a lot of card draw, and Guardian is very energy hungry, despite the stasis. I guess probably because cards in stasis come out for free. But yeah, I find that Guardian takes a lot of energy, takes a lot of cards that require energy. So drawing 4 means that you're drawing a lot of good cards that just you can't play. And I don't like to give up on cards like that. Also, this downside is extremely punishing. Like, no. You like this is almost untakeable, unupgraded, unless you're in a really comfortable situation and about to hit an upgrade station where you're going to use this, which reduces each of your debuffs by 1, which reduces this to draw 1 less card next turn, which is workable. I wouldn't say acceptable, I say it's workable. So yeah, a couple of big downsides. The draw 2 less next turn, and drawing 4 cards for 1 energy is actually a downside. Call me picky. I guess if you're the kind of person that takes a bunch of cheap cards, or maybe have a bunch of gems in your deck, this is fine. But otherwise, you usually want to play cards when you draw them, and if you draw too many, then you're going to miss out on playing some of your important cards, which you may need to get in play over multiple turns. Overall, I think this is very tough to take, although I could absolutely see a higher level player being like, what is this bozo talking about? This is amazing card draw, take it. So yeah. Then again, though, like, I don't often talk about the importance of... Wait, yes I do. What am I talking about? I talk a lot about the importance of consistency over multiple turns. People like to talk about how good front load is and acceleration, all that. And drawing 4 cards would be great if you could actually end a fight in 1 turn, but Guardian cannot, unless you're very lucky. So drawing a bunch of cards all at once is not going to do it for you. Oh yeah, Guardian also doesn't have any energy generation except for rare cards. That specifically, Stasis Engine and Citrine. Everything energy Guardian does other than those 2 cards is stasis, which other characters actually don't have that problem, for the most part. So a bunch of card draw, you could just take an energy card, like a Seeing Red, with your Battle Trance, and you'd be great. But Guardian does not have that luxury. I feel like this card would need a change at some point. I feel like this has potential, and I would love to have a draw card to help out with statuses and curses, because Repulsor sucks, but this isn't it. Then again, though, this could be a playstyle thing, so think about it in your own runs. Just be very careful about this downside. Do not underestimate the downside of drawing 2 less cards on your next turn. You need consistency as Guardian over multiple turns. Metallicize, surprisingly usable, despite Guardian's block generation. If you rely a lot on defensive mode, you're gaining only 10 block per turn when in defensive mode. So that only covers part of the enemy's attacks past Act 1. So you need to supplement it with something. Adding 3 more block on top of that can actually do it. It's also fine in Act 1 before you have any of your extra brace cards because you take less chip damage. And chip damage is really important on Guardian, unlike Ironclad, who heals 6 every fight. So yeah, this is actually better than it looks. It has no synergies, but it does cover a weakness of Guardians in that you can delay your block scaling for further. You can delay your block scaling for longer by taking this, so that you don't leak as much HP from just relying on defensive mode. That's kind of what this card used to be. Armored Protocol. The art is from Harden, but this used to be Armored Protocol, where you gain 5 block at the end of your turn when in defensive mode. And I would use that for a very similar situation, where defensive mode was all of my block, and then I would upgrade this because it gave you 8 block at the end of defensive mode. It was great for that. I understand why had to be changed because not very many people were taking it. And honestly, the cases where I was using defensive mode exclusively were very few and far between. So having this little bit of consistency is nice. The upgrade, probably not necessary. Three as a base number is always very awkward to give an upgrade number. 5 would probably be... Actually, 5 would be balanced on Guardian. Hot take. 5 would be balanced. But in other cases, it might be too much. We talked about Guardian Roll, so we're going to skip. Walker Claw, pretty solid with strength scaling. Otherwise, it's not great. This legitimately, like, when you see cards like this that have 1 synergy, you need to be saying to yourself, I need that synergy in order for this card to be good. Most of the time, I think. I have taken this, like, there's Roll Attack, right? 16 damage for and 8 brace for 2 energy. Very similar damage to this. I take that card a lot, and it works great for damage. I had a run in this series where I was like, hey, I'll take this. I'll take a Walker Claw. It does very similar damage. It's 1 less, but that's okay. Guardian doesn't need Carnage level numbers to succeed. They can deal with something like this, and it's fine. And I ended up taking a second one because I still needed front-loaded damage. And then I died in Act 2, I think. Because I had no strength support. And it turns out, over the long run, 15 damage by itself is pretty bad for 2 energy. Roll Attack is very relevant because it gives you brace. So the 16 damage is fine because it helps you, because it simultaneously helps you stall. And Walker Claw cannot do that. So this is the kind of card that you really need to have strength for. In fact, even if you start with a strength gem, I would still hesitate to take this. Because you need it consistently with the Walker Claw. And honestly, you probably need more than 2 strength for this to be good. The nice thing is, though, is that it upgrades to 4 hits. With a high base damage, that's actually pretty good. You can dump just a couple strength into this, and you can probably dump like 3 or 4 strength into this, and it's good enough. Which actually matches up with Polybeam. So yeah, the main downside is just 2 cost. And necessary synergy. Just like Polybeam's necessary synergy, except that only costs 1. But as a common card, if you've got a bunch of strength scaling but need something to dump it, you're pretty likely to find it. You're pretty likely to find this or one of the other strength dump cards by that time. Overall, that's what I have to say about this. It's solid if you have the support for it. And thankfully, the support isn't too hard to find, since strength is a pretty major source of damage for Guardian. I will say, though, that stasis is another big part of Guardian's damage scaling, so you're not guaranteed to find strength. And this does not work great with... This does not work with stasis. It costs 1 too many to be good. You don't want to wait 3 turns for this. Crystal Ray. Deal 12 damage, deals 2 additional damage for each gem in all of your socketed cards. This has the opposite problem of Perfected Strike. Perfected Strike is acceptable because it does 18 base damage. And you have Vulnerable in the starting kit, which can be used sometimes if you have the right draw order. And you can find other vulnerable cards. Crystal Ray. The only vulnerable cards in Guardian's kit are Ventsteam and Garnet. And with 1 common, 1 uncommon, you are far from guaranteed to find them. Far from guaranteed? I guess not that far from guaranteed. No, it's still pretty... I'd say it's about a 50-50 to find it in a relevant situation where you want to take them. So this already doesn't have that as a benefit. Also, it doesn't have the front-loaded damage that Perfected Strike does. You can build into it. This probably has a higher ceiling than Perfected Strike, because you can take a ton of gems. But honestly, every time I've taken this, like, I already don't take this very often because of its low base damage, but on top of that, the times where I have enough gems for this to be somewhat relevant, it still does, like, Carnage Plus levels of damage. And Carnage Plus, by the time you're getting that level, is like Act 3 and beyond. That damage is no longer acceptable. This does not do enough damage. Unless you are desperate for late game damage, I would not suggest taking this. Unless you are an absolute gem fiend and take insane numbers of gems. Yeah, Gigabeam. No, Gem Cannon is better, but like it's also a rare. It's not really comparable. This is just bad on its own, I would say. So yeah, waiting for a buff on this. Even the upgrade is not good enough. 4 damage on a 2-cost card? Are you kidding me? That's not acceptable. Not at all. Anyway. I mean, at least it got 2 more damage when it was buffed. So, yeah, I would say this is probably one you want to avoid. I've said that about a number of cards, and this is why Act 1 is so hard for Guardian, and why Transforms are bad. Really, the only reason Guardian's able to survive as well as they do is because Stasis is almost as strong as attacks, maybe even as strong in Act 1. I think it's almost as strong as attacks in Act 1. It's still a little bit sketchy, but you can survive with them if you're forced to. So Stasis adding on to that to help you survive Act 1 is helping you versus all of these cards that are just taking up space in your card rewards. So yeah, don't forget to look for Stasis as an alternative to attacks when you're taking on Act 1. They can absolutely win you Act 1. I've done it. I have. There's a video of the 100 run series, or 100 GA series, called Zero Attack Act 1. I highly recommend you at least watch the first act. Charge Up, the final card. Not a part of defensive mode, gems, or stasis. Gain 6 block, next turn gain 2 temporary strength. This would have been a part of stasis before it got changed, because it used to be put this card into stasis, and then when it ticks, you gain 8 block and 1 strength. It used to cost 0 and then upgrade to 1 cost. It gained energy cost whenever you upgraded it because it would spend more turns in stasis. It was interesting as a concept, but it ultimately didn't work because it had no merit in front load, and honestly, 1 turn of block is not acceptable. You'd much rather have a shield charger for block. But now, this is a pretty solid block card. 6 block is a little bit on the low end, but 2 temporary strength next turn is actually great. If you need this to block, you would absolutely love to have the strength next turn. But even if not, I think people underestimate next turn effects because you only have a limited amount of energy and card draw each turn. Next turn, even though you have to wait, you are superseding that restriction. You are gaining 2 temporary strength next turn without spending an energy or a card draw, which is already very limited for you. So this actually is better than it seemed to me. When I first saw this change, I was like, is this ever going to be consistent enough for me to want that 2 temporary strength, or is it just going to be a 6 block card? And it turns out that it is consistent enough. Probably for the same reason that I was talking about earlier with the socketed and unsocketed starting gems. You're going to take more attack cards in Act 1, more front-loaded attack cards. So that's around the time where you're going to be taking front-loaded block cards, somewhere in the mid to late Act 1. Sometimes early Act 1 if you're unlucky. So you take one of these in preparation for Act 2. You take 1 or 2 block cards in preparation for Act 2. In the second half of Act 1. So by then you probably have a decent number of attacks. Probably. Sometimes you go into stasis and then this is worse. But you're going to need front-loaded attacks anyway, so maybe you just find more. And the nice thing is that this sometimes leans into the temporary buff scaling. This has actually activated Artifact more times than I expect. More times than I ever would have thought it would. Or stuff like, what do you call it? The Tiny Bowler Hat's Champ card, Last Stand, to remove all debuffs. Debuff reduction works very well with it. It's actually very solid. You just need to take a look at your deck and make sure that it fits. If you're doing stasis things, you should maybe think twice about this. If you have enough attacks and you are in need of a block card, I would take this some part in Act 1. I would say there are two other common block cards. There's Piercing Hide and there's Recover. I think like all three of those have their place. Piercing Hide has Brace attached to it, which is defensive mode. That's a very strong effect. And Recover has Stasis attached to it, which is a very strong effect. So both of those things do something very strong inherently. This is more of a general value. This does something specific that I find falls off later if you don't have the support for it. Like if you're not doing a lot with attacks in the later game, or you don't do debuff reduction, this will just feel like another defend. You get a little bit more damage, but ultimately if you don't kill the enemy, then damage doesn't matter. So yeah, you need something to work. You will need something to work with this strength later in the game. You will need to lean more into attacks or debuff reduction. Otherwise, this will just feel like a block card. That's just my experience, though. I don't think that speaks poorly to this card. I think it's still very solid. And it's very helpful with the early game. I will say that much too. I think the game that I'm thinking about, where it felt bad, was where I had 2 or maybe even 3, and didn't have the proper support for it. So it might not be that big of a deal. Just keep your eye open. And yeah, that's going to be everything. Just to refresh your memory here with those notes. Yeah, I think I covered everything I wanted to cover. I guess oh yeah, I wanted to say during the part with the Brace and Act 1 elites, you lose HP to save HP. That's a concept that you need to remember for hallway fights too, and sometimes the boss. That's why it's so important to predict future turns. The more you can do that, the better you'll find. The more you'll find the opportunities. So, if you can predict future turns, you can plan your defensive mode. Just don't forget that losing HP also activates defensive mode, so that you can better take advantage of this. Yeah, that's going to be it for this. Man, this is a long one. I am tired. So, that's going to be it. I hope that this series was helpful to you, however much you've watched of it. I very much enjoy this character, and I want other people to be able to enjoy it too, because it's very tough. It's a very unintuitive character, and very tough to learn. But once you do learn it, it is very rewarding. You feel very smart. I will say that. The successful predictions, the gem stuff was probably the most fun thing for me when I first learned this character. When I was taking a lot more gems, I specifically have a memory of being at a campfire, sitting with like 6 different socketed cards and 6 different gems, and puzzling out which gem goes in which card, and thinking about all the different possibilities of how strong those would be, and how strong my deck was going to be after I was done. It was great. So I want other people to be able to enjoy that experience too. It's also why I like Downfall in general. You know, there's a lot of really cool stuff there, and I want people to be able to enjoy it just like I do. Even though I mostly stick with Guardian. So, yeah. Just as a reminder, I have a series where I play Guardian. I kind of over-explained everything so far. I might change that going forward. Starting on episode 81 a couple days from now. I'm gonna try and tone things down in the over-explained department in case... And if you don't like the over-explained stuff, maybe you can check that out. But if you do, or if you can tolerate it, I have 80 episodes of Guardian runs so far, with a lot of Guardian gameplay for you to enjoy. and for you to build on what I've said in this series, because I cannot cover everything or every scenario. And to be honest, even if I did, uh, learning happens in multiple ways. So providing yourself more sources to learn from, even if they're not directly someone telling you something, will help you learn a lot more effectively. Take advantage of every opportunity you can. That's something that you can do in life as well as the game. All right, enough cheesiness. Um, if I see you in any of those episodes, well, if you go watch any of those episodes, I will see you then. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.